Hi, Chenwei. Nice to see you.
I,
Do we have quorum, Isabel?
Yes, we do.
Okay, we can get started then. Hi, everyone. This is Cheryl Ramirez, Chair of the Finance and Revenue Committee of the Universal Health Plan Governing Board. This is our regular monthly meeting, February 3rd. So we'd like to start with roll call.
Good morning. Cheryl Ramirez.
Here.
Thank you. Chenwei Chi.
Here.
Thank you. Mary Lou Henrich.
Here.
Thank you. Richard Gibson.
Here.
Thank you. Jeff Goodman.
Here.
Thank you. John Santa.
Here.
Thank you. Bethany Stairs.
Here.
Thank you. Charlie Swanson.
Here.
Thank you. That's everybody.
Okay, thank you, Isabel. I will quickly review the agenda and then we'll move on. We've got lots of things to cover today. So first, hopefully you've seen the attachments that were sent to us yesterday from Milliman. There was an attachment where they responded to many of the questions that you submitted. There are slides that they're going to present, and there are slides from Echo Northwest. There are a couple of slides that Helen put in the deck just late yesterday, but that shouldn't be new information to you. So we'll start with a finance and revenues deliverables discussion that will be led by our board chair, Helen Belanca, and she'll review the finance and revenue work plan tasks and deliverables and what's left for us to do. Then we'll go to Echo Northwest. They're going to start talking about the operating reserve target, funding and financing strategies. And then last, we'll have Milliman go through their cost estimate and answer questions that you have and go through some of the written responses. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Helen Belanca, the board chair, to really do this finance and revenue, what we're calling a reset of our committee. But really, it's just where we've been and what we need to do yet. So Helen, I'll hand it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Cheryl. And thanks to all of you for letting me take some time on your agenda. I know your work is really packed. I'm jumping in here today because I've been listening in to your last few meetings. And I have to say, there is nothing I enjoy more than listening to a group of really smart people tackle a really difficult problem. And so I just want to start by expressing my appreciation for all of the thought and real positive intentions you all have in doing this work. Your expertise is so valuable to this board, and we listen carefully to all of your recommendations. It seems to me that in the past couple of meetings, a couple of questions have come up, and I just wanted to offer some clarification. Your work is pretty limited in terms of the coming months. And so I wanted to make sure that we use the time that we have with you as best as we can. So with that, I'll go to the next slide. These are the questions that I think I've heard listening into your meetings. And I think that to some extent they are all interrelated. And so I know that you will all have questions and comments and feedbacks about what I'm going to go through here. And what I would ask is if you would allow me to just kind of go through all four of these, because like I said, I think they're interrelated, and I'm hoping to sort of address some of the issues that have come up as I work through these. So go ahead, next slide. So the first question that I've heard is, there was a question at the last meeting of, are we building a single payer plan? And I just want to be really clear on that. Our language around this at the board's work has been a little fuzzy, I admit. It was hard for us to all get our hands around what exactly are we building here. But I want to say that yes, the answer is yes to that question, to the extent that we can. The language that we use that comes from the legislature and also sort of advice from when we talk about the legal issues involved in the work that we're doing is that we're creating a playbook. Thank you to Dr. Chi for that language. We're creating a playbook for a universal health plan that covers everyone, paid for through a unified financing strategy. That's the language we've been encouraged to use, with all legally permissible funding. And it's paid through a state trust in the state treasury and operated by a public corporation. It is as close to a single payer as an individual state working within a federal system can possibly get. Go ahead to the next slide. One state within a federal system can never truly be a single payer because there are always going to be other systems paying for healthcare in Oregon that we can't control. The best examples of that are the VA system, the TRICARE insurance, and the Indian Health Service. Those dollars will not be part of this plan. They are required to be kept separate. Folks in the VA system and the IHS, of course, can opt in to use the Universal Health Plan, but it always has to be an option to them, and they have to have the option to continue using those systems of care. And then there's a lot of questions about Medicare Part A, since it's an entitlement program, and anyone meeting the requirements is legally entitled to those benefits and has a statutory right to choose traditional Medicare fee-for-service if they want to. So obviously we are pursuing waivers for Medicare, absolutely, but we just want to understand the legal ramifications of that. And then ERISA is a federal law that protects employers' rights to choose benefits they offer their employees. We've known from day one, of course, the task force knew from day one that an ERISA challenge was going to be a big obstacle to this work. So we're just keeping those things in mind. None of those would be issues if this were a true single payer at a federal level, but at a state level, we have to have those considerations. So our language has been a little bit waffly about single payer or not. We're trying to use universal health plan and unified financing system. But I can assure you, you can go to the next slide. I can assure you that what we are doing is building as close to a single payer as possible. We're committed to delivering a report to the legislature that outlines how to cover everyone in Oregon under a unified financing strategy. And that's the language that we use. In addition to that, we will include some options for a phase-in approach and some strategies to bring in different markets in different ways, considering the legal issues in the different markets. The ERISA market, the Medicare market, the Medicaid market, they all have different issues in terms of bringing them on board in Universal Health Plan. And I think it is wise for us to include some strategies and some options for how you would bring those in different ways. Next slide. Okay, the next question I heard was about the budget from last year and this idea that sort of we left $600,000 on the table, which I sort of resist that language, but it is true we did not spend our fully allocated budget last year in terms of, and when we brought Milliman on. So I just wanted to clarify what happened last year. When the board was convened, our original plan was to have a single financial firm to contract to build the whole revenue strategy, estimate the expenditures, and a third big body of work, which was to assess the impact of a universal health plan on the overall Oregon economy. How many jobs are we going to lose? What is going to be the impact in various aspects of our economy? How will it affect people's income? And so we had this plan to do this really big financial strategy. It was an enormous contract. And as I'm sure many of you know, when the state does contracts over $500,000, there's like a different, more involved process for putting that RFP out and getting bids on it. And it takes quite a long time. It was really hard to get that RFP out. We had to get approval from, go through all of the regulatory processes at the state, and it took a while to get it out. Once we did get it out, nobody applied, not a single firm. And so we had to, at that point, make some decisions. And one of the decisions that our previous executive director, this was before Mimi's time, our previous executive director made, and I think was a great one, is why don't we pull out the revenue strategy as a separate body of work? It will be a smaller contract. It could happen faster. We could get somebody on board and starting to work with our board and committees quickly and work on that revenue strategy. We knew that was going to be the key part of this plan that we had to work out. And then we will continue this longer process to get a larger firm on board, and we will leave the expenditures and the overall economic impact to the other firm. Turns out that was a really wise decision because that's how we got Echo Northwest. So that smaller contract is what allowed us to contract with Echo Northwest, and I think we all agree that has been an incredibly productive and useful and beneficial contract for our work. So we're really glad about that. But once Milliman got on board, of course, then there were some delays in terms of finalizing the contract language. And so I will say that we worked really hard to spend that money. We tried really hard, but because of some delays that we couldn't really control, we weren't able to get that very large contract, and that was the majority of our budget. That very large contract didn't come in into our expenditures at the time that we thought they would, and so the year ran out before we spent the money. So that's accurate. Okay, next slide. So the next question, and I think one of the biggest ones for this group, is why are the Finance and Revenue, PD&E, and Ops committees scheduled to end in March? I want you to all know that we, meaning Judy and I, working with Mimi and Isabel and Lee, have been really spending a lot of time thinking through the work that needs to happen in order to get our deliverables to the legislature on time. The board did tremendous amounts of work on our work plan at the beginning, and then we had to do some major revisions. Once Mimi came on board, we had a big strategic planning meeting once Mimi came on board, and we had to rework the work plan. Originally, the Finance and Revenue Committee, for instance, was supposed to wrap up all of its activities in August of last year, but that was assuming that the Milliman contract would come in when we thought it would, and the revenue strategy would be done months earlier, right? So obviously that didn't happen. When we reworked the work plans of all of our committees, we extended everybody 6 months to end in March of this year instead of August of last year. So we've tried to really accommodate the work that needed to happen and yet stay on time for what we need to do by the fall. So the reason why these 3 committees will be ending their activities in March is that all of their deliverables have been met, or they will be by March. Committees, of course, exist to fulfill deliverables that are outlined by the board, and the board set forth a number of deliverables for each committees, and all of those will have been fulfilled by March. Once that happens, we don't really have a reason for the committees to continue. We have to dedicate a lot of staff time to making those committees work. And once the deliverables are in, it doesn't really make sense for those committees to continue. But more importantly, the board needs some time to reconcile all the recommendations from the committees. We have to think about what PD&E has come up with in terms of eligibility, benefits, and the expenditures, as well as some options around expenditures, and look at what the revenue has what you have come up with the revenue strategy. And we have to reconcile those two. We have to make them work, or at least justify how they could work together. And then we have to pull in the work of the operations committee with their administrative costs and structures, and then try to formulate it all into a single plan. That is the work of the board to do that, to pull in all of these recommendations from the committees, and we need time to do that. Currently in our schedule, we have 2 fully dedicated meetings to doing that. I don't think that's nearly enough. I think there's a lot of work that needs to happen in there, but we need to protect some time at the board meetings where all we're doing is trying to reconcile the recommendations that we already have. In addition, our consultant contracts with both Echo Northwest and Milliman have essentially run out, and they have a few more things to tie up, but they will not be available to the committees after March. And so that was another impetus for the committee work to end at that time. I want to point out and officially formally thank Mimi and Isabel and Lee, our staff, because they spend so much time planning, preparing for, running, and then doing the minutes and follow-up for all 4 of our committee meetings. And it is so much work. They spend many hours of their work week on these committee meetings. And so we have so much gratitude for them for doing that. And we are at a point in our work where we need all 3 of our staff members to sort of switch their focus and start doing other things. So supporting the committees is just not something that they're going to be able to do after March. We need to have them focus on starting up and supporting our new transition committee. They're going to be doing a lot of work in the reconciliation process. And a very big chunk of work is that they are responsible now for building a timeline, a work plan, and a budget for the next biennium so that we can justify to the legislature why this work should keep going. I've been through that process of building a budget and work plan and timeline twice now, and it is so much work, right? And so we need our staff to be focused on those pieces of work and not supporting the committees anymore. So it'll relieve their time from that. Next slide. I want to point out that, so first of all, I certainly did hear your strong disagreement with that from the last meeting and the vote that you took to continue the meetings after March. I heard that, Cheryl heard that. That issue will come to the board in February, and the board will certainly consider that. But I wanted to give you some background on why that decision was made. So the board will consider that request in all of that, but I wanted to kind of frame it up for you about why we ended up there. And I also want to point out that if it ends up that the committees do end in March, this committee specifically, it doesn't mean that it's the end of your involvement. We still need the expertise of all of you on this committee as we reconcile the recommendations and plan the transition. You understand things about the revenue strategy that the board doesn't, and we are going to need your help and support as we try and make some of those decisions. How we imagine that's going to happen is less about sort of having you have a kind of a, I'm using the word closed discussion. Of course, it's an open meeting, but what I mean is a discussion just within the committee. And instead, we want you to talk directly to the board, right? And so in order to do that, we might invite some of you to be guests at our board meeting. We might ask for very specific written comment saying, we're going to be trying to make this decision. Can you please give us your opinion on how we should manage X, Y, and Z, and ask for a written opinion that we could consider at the board. There's all kinds of ways that we can tap into your expertise as we need it, as we go through those decisions. And I think it'll be easier and a little bit less cumbersome to do it directly between folks of you on the committee that have that expertise and the board as we make those decisions. There's also going to be a formal technical report that will be written by both Echo Northwest and then another one by Milliman, where they're going to detail all of their decision-making processes, how they got to the numbers that they did, how everything came about. And I would strongly encourage all of you together as a committee or individually, if you prefer that, to carefully read both of those reports and then submit comments and opinions about them. If you feel that something is in error or you have a different approach to something or want the board or the legislature to consider doing things a different way, you are more than welcome to submit comments on those reports, and then we can include those as we put it all together. Next slide.
And it looks like Cheryl has her hand raised.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Yeah.
Do you remember, or could you remind us when those technical reports will be out? Because I'm forgetting.
Mimi?
Pretty certain they'll be completed by March.
Great, thanks.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then, so finally, I just kind of want to touch on just a little bit of perspective in terms of where we are in this journey. I think I, more than anybody else, am aware that this board does not have the resources it needs to do this enormous task that has been placed in front of us. We're all volunteers. You are all volunteers. We have a very small budget and a very small staff, and we've been given an enormous task on a very short timeline. I think, how we have put that together is that it's just not possible for us to work out all of the details of how this will work, given those limited resources, both in terms of people, time, and money. We're just not going to be able to do it, right? So we are going to do the best that we can in terms of developing a playbook for how a UHP could work. And the purpose of this report, the main thing that we're trying to do, is to gain interest, to build some credibility, to answer key questions about especially how the revenue strategy would work. That's the question that everybody has. How would we pay for it, right? So we've got to be able to answer some key questions about that. We've got to have a plan for cost containment. We've got to show that it's better for businesses and it doesn't make the business environment worse. And then we can spend some time, if we gain that interest and support, and we can build a coalition of that support, and we can get people on board to say, yes, this is something we pursue. My hope is that we get more resources, we get more time, we get more people, we get more money, and we can keep fleshing this out. But it's just not going to be possible to get to all the details that need to be sorted out for this actually to be implemented, right? This is not a plug and play situation. We're not going to put together a plan, hand it to the legislature, and then they're just going to do it. That is just not really where we are in this process. We need to show them enough details to gain their support and to show that this is a credible plan. And then it will need a lot more investment. Next slide. Is there one more? Yeah, there should be one more slide, I think.
Yeah, I have progressed it. It's just
Oh,
lagged a
sorry.
bit.
I was like, oops. Okay, so in that context, well, the board needs, and what I need, I'm laughing a little bit because I just keep having this image in my head of me sitting in front of these legislative committees, and they're going to be asking me questions that I need answers to, that I think really these are the things that that are the key questions that this committee specifically really has to answer in the time that you have between now and March. First and foremost, we need a same year comparison for revenue and expenditures. You all know that Echo Northwest is working on it. That's the work that's happening now. We need that. We need to be able to compare apples to apples, and how close can we get to this, right? That's number one. Number two, we really need advice from you on which parts of the revenue strategy to adjust if the expenditures exceed revenue. Now, I am fully in agreement with folks on this committee who have emphasized over and over again that the savings in this plan come from administrative savings. I 100% agree with that. That is enormous. And right now we are trying to, when we think about the administrative structure for the UHP, we want it in that 4 to 5% range. I really don't want to see it above 5%. And we've been working with Milliman and looking at their numbers to try and see where that lands. So with the assumption that the administrative costs for this plan are going to stay in that 4 to 5% range, we still have the problem of what if healthcare expenditures exceed the revenue? And that's like not only the first year, the implementation year, but it's many years down the road. Once we're 10, 15 years in, we will come across a situation where with gene therapies and with the new immunotherapies and cancer treatments, there will be costs that are going to be hard to manage. And if the expenditures exceed revenues, what should we do? Which parts of the revenue strategy are sort of firm and shouldn't be adjusted? Which parts should be flexed up or down depending on the needs that we have? I don't know how to answer that question right now, and I could really use your advice. If we do have a ramp up phase, meaning we are transitioning into the Universal Health Plan over several years, should the revenue strategy also ramp up, and how should we approach that? And then a strategy for the reserves. I know that's on your agenda today. So how are we going to come up with the reserve money? Where will that money come from? And then a strategy for startup costs. We know when CCOs started, there was a big bump up in expenditures for the first couple of years as the system sort of makes that massive shift. And then it settled down into like the true cost of the program. So we are going to need some startup costs as well. And these are the questions that we really need help with. So that's what I'm hoping that this committee is willing to take on. Okay, I have a couple minutes left for questions. And I think the slides show the deliverables. Is that right, Isabel? Let's go to the next one. Yes, okay. So these are the deliverables that the committee has committed to. So develop a cost target that can be supported. So that cost target is what we're calling that gap funding between what is currently expected from federal revenue and what we would need to make up with a revenue strategy, revenue options to pay, and then describe the impact of revenue taxes on large and small businesses and households, and then identify startup costs and plan reserves. So these are the ones that we initially outlined. we used a little bit different language back when this was formulated than we've migrated to now that we've had some experts on board. So forgive the little language differences here, but basically it's to have a revenue strategy, to have startup and a reserve plan, and to understand how that'll impact businesses.
Ellen, I just wanted to break in that we have about 10 minutes for questions.
Okay,
If
good.
you can stick with us that long unless you need to leave.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay,
I can.
great.
Mhm.
And I'll let you call on people. It's fine.
Oh, but I can never see people's hands.
I will, I'll help you out.
Thank you.
Charlie,
has his hand.
Charlie has his hand up.
Okay.
So I have a number of comments and questions. So one is thank you for explaining this. And so I would just ask that regarding the committees stopping and or continuing or whatever, just make sure that it's the board decision. So that there's a vote at the board to do these sorts of things, because it is the board decision to decide whether the committees continue or not. So that's one of my asks, I guess. Another thing.
Can I just respond to that quickly?
Yeah.
So of course, you're right. It is a board decision if the committees continue or not. However, the board has hired Mimi as our executive director, and her very explicit job description is to administer the work plan, the timeline, and the budget. She has complete authority over those as our executive director. And so the board has entrusted Mimi to make those decisions. And she has done an outstanding job on all three of those fronts right up till now. And so we trust her when she says that this is the timeline that she needs. So that's what we're holding her accountable for, and that's her job. But yes, it is ultimately the board's decision. Go ahead.
Okay. I mean, so another comment. I don't think I don't think we should use the time of this meeting to do one of the very important things that we have not yet done. And that is, I think we should get, and that's related to the startup and reserves. I think that it's going to be useful to see that, but I don't think we should spend our time at this meeting, because we have so many other things to do, discussing the details of that and trying to make real decisions on that, because I think some of the other things are going to be more important at this point, and that is going to be a really difficult task. And I think we're going to be best to get information today and to then think about it and maybe confer with each other about it before next time, because I don't think we can have a useful enough discussion to take time away from some of the other things regarding that particular topic.
Charlie, if I can
Yeah.
interject, that's the plan for today. Absolutely. You're completely correct. The plan is just for information and discussion about the reserve and startup crash. It's not developing a strategy. Thank you.
Thank you. So and also regarding some of the things that are in or out, one of the things that I would suggest that we think about, or the board thinks about when presenting, from creating the report to legislature, is the possibility of a super waiver by the time something has to happen. And so, for example, that might allow us to include TRICARE. But I don't think we want to include the VA or Indian Health Services, but TRICARE, the reason for thinking about including them is most of the care that comes from TRICARE is provided by providers who serve everybody else. And so, but that's not true for the VA, and that's not true for Indian Health Services. So those are reasonably kept out, but TRICARE is reasonable to try to put in. And the same thing with the Federal Employee Health Benefits package. So for federal employees, I think that's also something we want to consider including. And I think the current numbers sort of have the federal employees included, but not TRICARE. So anyway, those are some details we have to think about. I'll stop there. That's enough. Yeah.
Thank you.
I think Jeff was next.
Charlie, I know you have more, but thank you. I'm one of the voices who wanted this group to continue because I don't think we have fulfilled our task, but I understand which way the wind is blowing, and I accept that. To that end, how many more meetings do we actually have? Is one meeting in February, one meeting in March, and we're done? That's question one.
I'm going to defer to Cheryl on that.
As far as I know, we're scheduled for 4 meetings total, February and March.
2 this month, 2 next month.
Right.
Okay, thank you. will we as a committee have a chance to vote yay or nay on a unified report going to the board? Or are we doing just simply, if we want to offer comments on Eco Northwest and Milliman, we can do so?
When you say unified report, are you referring to
The
like
FNR.
right? But I'm
Well,
like a report about your whole body of work, or are you talking about comments
yes.
on the technical? Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yes. Will there be a FNR report from FNR to the board? Here's our recommendations and our work.
You know, what the other committees are doing is basically it's the sum of the other proposals, other proposals they have put forward. So I don't know, FNR might be a little bit different in this regard, but the other committees have a series of, operations has, this proposal and then this proposal, and has like a series of three, and we take that set of proposals as sort of the body of their work and in lieu of a report. I'm not sure we can ask the chairs to pull together a report. That wasn't what was outlined and expected of them. Cheryl, what do you think? I don't know. We usually just kind of we've been assuming that it's the sum of your proposals that you've put forth.
I always was thinking it would be our final recommendations, our final proposals.
That you would do
not
a final.
Not a full report on what we've all done.
Oh, okay.
Although I suppose we could get that from Echo Northwest. I mean, they've been doing something like that in certain areas of our work. So we could maybe pull that together, but I don't want to speak for Echo Northwest on that.
Okay. I see Morgan has his hand up, so I'll leave it till he's able to answer. Third question, I have one after that. The deliverables.
Mm-hmm.
The material posted on our website prior to the meeting showed 2 deliverables. The material presented just now has 4 or 5 deliverables. Which set of deliverables are we measuring ourselves against?
I want to make sure that we're talking about the same documents. So on the slide, that was pulled from our original work plan, what Isabel just showed on the slide. Is that right?
Yeah, the one that was
Yes.
presented this morning
Yeah.
Yes,
had
that's
like
from
five or six
Right.
items.
right. So
but like one of them is like establish a committee, right? So like
Right.
they're like some of them are. So the wording is a little off. These were written before the committees existed, right? And so we said, okay, what are the things we want this group to do? We got to pull together people. We got to develop a work plan, and then we didn't have the expertise of Echo Northwest or Milliman, and so that's what I meant. Like the language has been slightly adjusted and they've been condensed. I think in essence they're saying the same thing of what we need you to do, which is to build a revenue strategy and then startup costs and reserves. That's what's in both of those. It's a little bit more elaborate and clunky on the work plan language.
and if I can interject, there's the work plan has, if you go back one page, Isabel, if you don't mind, those are the tasks. They divided them up into tasks and deliverables. So those are the work plan tasks is what's on that slide. And the next slide is what are considered the work plan deliverables. There's some overlap. So
okay, to that point, on these 2 items, the work plan deliverables, number 1, we've delivered an apple pie with no apples in it, but you got the crust, but no apples. On number 2, we are not delivering on number 2.
Right. And we don't expect it to. So this was one of the pieces that we had originally had in our original proposal for our financial consultants. We didn't expect the committee to do this. That's an enormous piece of work to analyze the impact on the whole economy. And so it was in the original RFP that we put out that Milliman signed, and we have rethought that. We've talked about it with Milliman. We've talked about it with folks at LRO. We've considered it as a staff, and it's a lot of work, right, to figure that out. And we don't have the resources to do it, people or money wise. And so, yes, you're right. That was originally in the deliverables. We were hoping to make that happen. I don't think that is feasible, but we're not holding you to that.
And my last question, what is the process to submit comments in March when everything is done, or before everything is done in March? What is the process for that?
Comments on the technical reports or comments on what?
Comments on concerns about where we are with what we have done.
Well, you're
because
always,
I have concerns, which I have expressed.
of course, yeah. No, we welcome your comments always, written comments to the board. You can submit them as public comments to the whole board, and the whole board will see them. If they're general comments to the board about the process, we would welcome that. If they are comments specifically on the report, I think we'll come up with some way of like addending the technical reports of Echo Northwest and Milliman to allow the committee to sort of make comments on the process. So I think that would be separate, but you're always welcome to submit written comments to the board.
Thank you.
Mhm.
And Chunwei was next.
I have brief comments and suggestion for two subjects Helen presented. The first one is related to startup costs and reserve. And there are two separate issues related to startup costs and reserve. One is estimation, which I think is very properly assigned to this committee. The other is where would that come from? I think that deserves a board discussion. That when this plan is implemented, we would not have any revenue, but we need to have a significant startup cost. For example, if we are going to set up the central administration office plus regional administration office, and we need to hire people, this require significant amount of startup costs that I think the legislature will have to allocate budget for that. But where that come from, I think deserve the full board committee to discuss that, as well as reserve. And the issue of reserve related to the second issue. Helen, in your presentation, you talk about once this plan is implemented, what it would be the strategy we should address if the expenditure exceed revenue. And I think that issue also require the full board to discuss. Given the limited time and resources, we would not be able to develop a full detailed plan. But what's important is to develop the principle. And I think I shared this before. When
Right.
Taiwan implemented and legislated its universal health plan, it was written into law that if the contingency reserve fall behind 1 month expenditure, average expenditure, then that's the time the system need to raise tax, raise revenue. So this is an example that the full board need to discuss what are we proposing in terms of the how many months of contingency reserve as a minimum requirement.
Mhm.
And then with that, what would be the mechanism when we fall behind below that contingency reserve? What would be the mechanism either to cut expenditure or to raise revenue? But we don't need to discuss the detail, not even in the board. What we need to discuss more importantly is the principle, and
Right.
that need to be written into law, into legislation. Thank you.
Right. The basis for it. Yeah, no, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, no, I agree with you that that's something that needs to be taken up at the board. And I also know that the board would certainly appreciate recommendations from this committee. I mean, committees don't make decisions, they make recommendations, right? And then the board will make decisions. And mostly we adopt the recommendations of our committees because we trust them. But, you know, on issues like that, I think we would all really appreciate, you know, recommendations from the committee about how to handle that.
All right, Cheryl has her hand up, and I think we're at about time.
I agree, that
After-
makes good sense. I just had a quick comment on one of Charlie's comments, and that is veterans also get services out in the community, not just by the VA. The VA benefits are so complicated and tiered that not all of them qualify for all of the veterans benefits. And at least I can speak for the behavioral health system. They are served by our behavioral health crisis response. They're served as they transition from different levels of care, an array of outpatient services. And if they're involved in the criminal justice system, those are specialized services from the public behavioral health system. So I just wanted to note that. I also wanted to check with Morgan if he wanted to respond to the final report versus final recommendations. I know you had your hand up, but you don't anymore. So just wanted to offer.
I'll just give a quick, we do have a draft report, and it's a little weird. It's like technically Echo's report per our contract, but to me, it's really just I call it a summary of the panel's work to date on the key topics of it. So
Mhm.
think of it as basically us trying to document the things we've been talking about as a group and finance and revenue and put that up to paper. Obviously, I think as Jeff said, there may be some difference of opinions on some of those pieces, but think of it as like, as much as there's been a consensus opinion on those pieces, we're trying to document them.
Mhm. That's great. Thanks, Morgan.
Just to follow on that, will the F&R committee have a chance to look at that, review it, and then say vote yay or nay on it?
I don't know if Cheryl and Morgan have worked something out. I'm not aware. Go ahead.
I don't have an answer to that. So
Yeah, I don't really either. I suppose it depends on the timing of Echo Northwest's report. But we can discuss. I just don't have an answer. Did we want to go with John yet before we end this? Okay, go ahead, John.
Yeah, I would just like to urge that at both the committee level and the board level, that we adhere to the processes that I think are clearly available to us. For example, this committee has 4 meetings. I urge colleagues that if we're serious about what we're saying, we vote on it. And that's up to us whether we vote on something. That we have a record of the decisions that are made over the next 4 meetings, that we have minutes that are taken every meeting, and that we have a chance to see them and approve them, so we can make sure the record of this committee, by the time it ends, is clear. Same at the board. It's time to be careful and appropriate when it comes to the process. Our charter says the board creates this committee and appoints its members, and the board ends this committee, replaces its members. For myself, I think we've all taken significant risks. There's no more risks that are important here than financial. And I think the board needs to be clear what it wants us to do and what it doesn't want us to do. So I would just ask for those process considerations to be carefully and always followed.
Yeah, I mean, with that, I think I have a lot of confidence in Cheryl with the support of Morgan and Echo Northwest to kind of figure out what these last 4 meetings need to cover, and I trust that they will that they'll get there to the end. So yes, I agree with you. So they understand what their charge is, the details of what those discussions look like is in their hands. So I think that will get there. And again, I really appreciate all the time and energy of this board. It's a remarkable amount of work that you've done, and truly the board and ultimately the whole state of Oregon is really grateful to you for the work. And so I hope that this launches us into an ongoing journey to get where we all want to go. So thank you for your time. I really appreciate it, and thank you for your work.
Thanks so much for joining us, Helen. Appreciate that. So we'll move on to the board and committee updates by Director McDonald.
All right, thanks everyone. This is Dr. Mimi McDonald, Executive Director of the Universal Health Plan Governance Board. So providing some board updates. Our next board meeting occurs on February 19th. At that time, as the board will be focusing really on the expenditures, which is what a significant amount of this committee's meeting will be happening today, to make sure that all of the board members have a clear understanding of how the expenditure estimates were attained and the significance of them. We also, I hope you all have a chance to tune in, because we are going to have a presentation by Dr. Chi about global experiences with universal healthcare. So that will be great. The board will also be reviewing and voting on some of the preliminary proposals from the committee. So moving on to that, the operations committee has an enrollment proposal that they're submitting to the board, and also a proposal around subrogation. The operations committee has just started talking about an information system strategy. So that's not something that's going to be a proposal that's put forward at this time, but that discussion is beginning. That discussion will very likely continue on into the transition committee as well. It's such a large topic. Next, our community engagement and communications committee had a meeting just in January. And then that committee has decided to re-up their regularly scheduled meetings that will begin in March. The CECC will also start having their meetings occur at a later time to kind of straddle the workday. So the plan is for the committee meetings to start at 4 p.m. and go on into 6:30 to allow more members of the public potentially to participate. During the months of February and March, there will be targeted engagement sessions happening. The sessions will be happening in March. The planning continues here in February with various groups. Now that there is sufficient sort of planning and preliminary proposals to put forth to some of those groups, such as the proposed revenue strategy, some of the proposed expenditures, and to get feedback to that in enough time to get all of that information to the board for their final decision making. In addition, there's been started on a website update. So some of those changes have already been made, and that's with the help of with staff. Isabel has been instrumental in that, along with the CECC committee chairs and our consultant, Patty Wentz. So trying to do some clarification. It's not a wholesale update of the website, but trying to make things more accessible, and that's going to that work is ongoing. Plan design and expenditure is in 2 days from today. So on Thursday, at that point, there will be a preliminary proposal around behavioral health sort of administration. There's already been a large discussion in that group about what types of behavioral health services should be covered. And so this is more sort of the nuts and bolts of it. There's also going to be a terrific presentation from Lee Hastings on sort of the complexities of the prescription drug environment that we're working in, and with also some recommendations for cost containment strategies in that, and other cost containment strategies for the Plan Design and Expenditure Committee to discuss and create. And we'll probably have a proposal for both sets of those things, both for the behavioral health administration and cost containment strategies. And then last but not least, the transition committee. So at this February board meeting, there will be a vote from the board to approve the members that have been proposed for the transition committee. There's also been a work plan and charter that's been developed with the transition committee leadership, which is made up of Mike Leahy and Dr. Judy Richardson. And that work plan and charter will be put forth to the board and then also voted upon. So I'll pause there if there are any questions. Great, don't see any hands. We can move on.
Great. I will go ahead and
Thank you, Morgan.
share. Okay, I know, and I'm going to ask my colleague Sarah Emmons to join me as well. So the purpose of this is really to do a quick level set and to discuss and get feedback and direction for you on, I think, 2 important topics. One around the question that we've been talking about with respect to operating reserves and what that number should be, I guess, specifically. And then to think about, dig a little deeper and actually think about an approach both on the funding and or financing sides that can help meet that target. I don't think we need to spend much time here on the operating reserve. We have our memorandum that we talked about, or we sent out back in December. We also included it as part of the materials for this month. But basically, right, some set aside to manage mismatches in timing and volatility, really designed to meet short-term needs, but not necessarily totally catastrophic needs. These are really important for the liquidity, solvency, and fiscal prudence of the corporation as it makes its payments for claims. So when we look at the totality of the experience that we've had across comparable international and stateside programs, knowing that there's really nothing comparable to what is being talked about this in the States, and then also looking at sort of other professional accounting sort of benchmarks, we're really kind of in a space of folks operating in kind of a 1 to 3 months of total planned expenditures as a sort of benchmark. That's based on professional guidance, insurance models, some experience in the Taiwan experience that Dr. Chi has forwarded to us, and we've been able to sort of document experiences at state, Oregon, and Washington, and across the national experience here. And then when we think about it, then, right, well, what does that number mean with respect to the updated 2032 plan costs that Milliman has, and we're looking at sort of basically the baseline estimate of full benefits, right? You're anywhere from between $7 billion to $20 billion in operating reserves that are going to be needed to sort of be met during that time. So the question then becomes, once we kind of think about sort of what that target should be, is really about how to pay for it. And I think these are two important concepts that we should be thinking about, is the funding part, right? Who ultimately pays, right? This is in the form of taxes, fees, redirected funding, spending at the state, right? Ultimately, there is a taxpayer paying for this. The question then becomes also financing. How do you then sort of make that money become available to you when you need it, right? Is that as simply as a pay as we go, we accumulate reserves? Do we actually want to sort of, go out and seek loans in the short term between the state? Do we actually want to bond, get that money on the sort of capital markets and pay it back over time? Those are really kind of questions of sort of how do you make it appear at the time that you need it. So when we put that together, what Sarah and I did was try to put together some ideas, take the sort of questions of like, well, whether we're solving for 7 billion or 20 billion, how can you sort of align kind of the funding and financing question? So the first one, right, is really just a state appropriation. Think of it as basically the state says, great, we've got money set aside for our own reserves, and we would basically, allocate that to you either through some form of its general fund or redirected spending, but basically think of it as money already in the tax system and the accounting system of the state to say, great, we'll let you do this, right? Or, right, it could be structured as a sort of repayment, right? You could borrow against it from some short-term perspective. And this is a very straightforward way to kind of, get state operated, when the UHP is sort of a state operated entity, right, that it can sort of access these funds that are already available in the system. Charlie, and then Jeff.
So I want to put out one more thing just for us to be thinking about. The current tax structure with the employer payroll tax is set at a particular amount, but for public employers, it is an amount that is substantially less than most public employers currently pay. And so when the public employees have that savings, there's a number of options of what they can do with it. Potentially, one of those things that could be done with some of that money anyway is this sort of funding. So to say, okay, rather than the state continuing to pay as much money out to school districts, for example, as they currently do, when the school districts don't have to pay quite so much for healthcare, some of that could be just great for the school district. They can do other things with it, but perhaps a little bit of it could be used to say, okay, well, the state will keep that money and put it into the system to help build up these reserves. So I just want to put that out there as a potential mechanism. So that would be for like the OEB parts, but the state directly controls it. So it'd be even easier for that. So to say, okay, we're going to use a little bit of that. So that just another thing to think about, a pot of money that exists in the system now that's used for healthcare that could be used for this purpose. So
yeah. And Charlie, you're specifically saying, thinking about our chart with kind of status quo and under the plan, that there are savings to the public agencies as we make the move. And what you're saying is, look, let's take some of that savings, right? Because it's really money that's already being collected from taxes and just redirect it to the operating reserve funding. Okay, great. Go ahead, Jeff.
Thank you. I appreciate the way it's being presented. If you can elaborate on each of these alternatives as you go through them, assuming the 1 to 3 month target that we're working on, I know that's not yet accepted, but just for discussion purposes, I mean, that's a number ranging from 6 billion and change to 20 billion. On each of these alternatives, exactly where is this 6 billion and change and 20 billion going to come from? Thank you.
Yeah. So I think this is the question here. So I think it is, we have to find, relative to what we've already been talking about in terms of funding the plan, right? In our in our 2022 $18 billion estimate, what we're having to say in 2032, we got to find 7 to 20 billion more dollars to put in the system. And to me, that's the most simple way I think about it is that's either money that's already in the system, right? I think Charlie articulated that instead of savings to the government, it's simply just like, well, we're not at least changing what they're paying here, but we can take that sort of those contributions that we're going to and use that as sort of an additional revenue source, right? And so I think that's a question then is saying like, well, we want to keep potentially tax burdens similar without raising kind of new revenues, but that's the sort of transition. What's in the system today to versus like we need to make the system a little bigger in the time between now and when UHP starts, or when UHP starts and then going forward, right? And there are different ways to think about that.
Do you have an estimate of what's in the system now? No, I see Charlie shaking his head. So
no,
okay.
I would say like, yeah, so like I would say an easiest way to think about it is those dollars are all committed, right?
Exactly.
Those state governments, state local governments aren't like sloshing around extra dollars, but they're wondering where they can spend it. And I think particularly in our current fiscal environment, that's even more true. So
I think we need, just to that point, I think we need to keep in mind as a group as we go over this, and I understand we're not making any recommendations today, but we are talking 7 to 20 billion of incremental dollars that have to come from somewhere. We're not going to find it under the couch in somebody's room.
Morgan, can I help out with the last question on kind of what's in the system, at least with respect to the rainy day fund? I just checked and there's $2 billion in it right now. So one way you could think about this is instead of having to take the money and actually give it in an appropriation to the corporation, potentially, and we have a slide that gets at this in a couple slides, you could consider potentially that the corporation becomes an allowable use of the rainy day fund. Like right now, there are these certain allowable uses, like if tax revenues drop 3%. So of course, it's not to the scale that we're looking for here, but one way of thinking about it, rather than the political unlikeliness of actually getting money from the rainy day fund to just hold, is just to have this corporation, which is probably going to be the biggest expense of state government, be an allowable use.
Which rainy day fund are you referring to?
The state rainy day fund. It's like $2 billion right now.
There's 2 separate rainy day funds that the state has. Which one are you referring to?
Whichever one popped up first on Google, but not the K-12 one. But we can get you that information though, follow up. I think the point is
the non-education one, sorry.
Not to have to appropriate from it, but just maybe thinking creatively about like, could this corporation become a claim on those dollars to kind of take advantage of the states as a backstop?
In effect, we're treating this not as an insurance-based model, but a fire model, in effect. Just another element of the state rather than insurance-based.
I'm not sure I understand the distinction, but I think the question is from a sort of actuarially sort of point of view, just saying like, do you have it? Basically, is like, can we have enough dollars really just to cover our costs? So I don't know technically if that's true, Jeff, but I think that's conceptually right. Is that
Okay.
we're really kind of thinking this is just another outlay of government funds, and we're basically trying to, given kind of what the sort of general volatility we see with respect to payments and taxes coming in, we're in that sort of 3-month range. And so that's the part we're going to target sort of our reserve policy to.
Cool.
Yeah.
2 billion is a good start. Now we need 7 to 20. Thank
Yeah.
you.
So I think that since we're talking about it, one of the things here is to think about is, and we have a slide here, is like, should we have a hybrid approach? Think of it as basically there's a different cost of the different kinds of money you can access, right? And simply just having kind of a soft backstop in kind of your last tier, right, being your kind of least expensive one, where the state is kind of really backstopping with their existing dollars, is a way to kind of get to your money, knowing that you might not be able to tip into that except in extreme cases, versus kind of like your first or second tranches of your 7 to 20 billion is the ones where you're really going to have to find new incremental dollars in the system to kind of seed that with, right? Because those are the dollars you're more likely to be using. And so that's just another way to kind of think about your thinking here, is like, what's our cost to access different layers of money relative to the constraints that each of those dollars may present to us. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, I do think it would be interesting, Morgan, if you could figure out, does the current Oregon Health Plan meet this requirement? And if so, how do they meet it? I do think Medicaid is the riskiest population here, because just as we're seeing now, a large segment of Medicaid can go from having a revenue stream to being uninsured. And that would be the probably most difficult transition for a single payer, because the commitment would be that those uninsured folks would still be insured. But I do think it's worthwhile for at least Medicaid. Does the state have a series of agreements that would satisfy this for Medicaid? And if so, how does that work? Thanks.
Okay. No, thanks, John. We can track that down. Mary Lou.
Really quickly, when we started, I worked for Multnomah County, and when the CCOs, except they were MCOs then, came in, we formed Care Oregon between OHSU and Multnomah County. And we had the state had this question about this new thing that we were calling Care Oregon. Who was it? Where was the deep pocket? Where was the backstop in case the actuarial analysis that we had that started it, didn't work? And all of a sudden it was costing us more than the amount we were getting from the state to cover people. And at that time, Multnomah County stepped up, Beverly Stein as the chair, and backstopped this new entity. And I remember Beverly asking me clearly, Mary Lou, if the actuarial numbers aren't correct, are you telling me that I'm going to send Multnomah County property tax to Klamath Falls? And I looked at her and I said, technically, yes, but that's not going to happen because we've got good numbers. We really, and thank the Lord, 3 years later, when we were able at Care Oregon to set aside enough of the reserve to be able to get out on our own, we spun it out. It became the nonprofit that it is now. And but anyway, just kind of a similar thought was it was kind of the full faith and funding of Multnomah County government standing behind this in case it didn't work. Anyway, so I'm hearing some things that sound kind of like that. Like,
yep.
Okay, that's all.
Okay, no, that's a good point. I think it's in line kind of with that sort of like, it's a big number and it's really hard to raise that number before we start this thing up. So what can we kind of trade on a little bit?
Yeah. Thank you.
Great. So then I think the second kind of different idea here, right, is think of this as a temporary transition tax or fee increase. And I think think of this as basically separate from the UHP tax plan, right? Would the state in its sort of process think about small increases to existing taxes, special fees or taxes that would help kind of surface that with other kind of dollars. And so, here we've seen plans basically say, well, hey, your UHP plan is only for paying for this once it's in operation, but we need to pay, and this is kind of ties in a little bit with the transition cost piece, right? We haven't even talked about sort of like, well, we got to stand up a new sort of entity, we got to pay for all this new infrastructure, perhaps, right? And how do we do that? This is kind of where we talked about, well, in some of those places, right, you might issue, general obligation bond and pay it back over time with additional proceeds, or you could help fund that sort of separately. So this is really a kind of a separate idea, but there isn't a whole lot of like precedent really kind of to think about this from a reserve perspective. They're usually more unique around, hey, we're going to build this IT system and this is how we're going to do it, separate from sort of how the plan may be paid for over time. Again, this is also something we've just touched on a little bit already, but the interphone loan, where we can kind of basically access these dollars at relatively low costs. Governments borrow from their existing reserve funds, utility funds, all the time is sort of kind of the way to sort of pay for things. And so think of it as basically those dollars are available, but the tax necessarily isn't, right? But so it's worth encumbering kind of a low cost of borrowing of those dollars that you need them, and you can pay them back over longer periods of time. Go ahead, Charlie.
So just another thought. OHA has a fair amount of people who are doing healthcare analytics of some sort. And if we are getting ready to transition away from what we're doing now into this new system, there may be quite a few people in OHA who, rather than doing the analytics or the kinds of studies and efforts they're doing now to keep the system going now, could be maybe transitioned into saying, well, what about how do we set up the IT for this new system or something? So it seems to me that there's a possibility of making use of OHA staff as they are transitioning from having to deal with OHP as it is now to this. And so essentially making use of some of that, those people to help with this. And I don't quite know how that would work, but it seems like something that could be explored.
Yeah, so not necessarily a reserve question, but a transition question, basically. Hey,
right.
These dollars are already in the system. We're just asking them to do something slightly different than what they're currently doing, but we don't need to find new dollars for that. So yeah, it's a kind of like dollars already in the system for the transition. Dr. Chi.
Yes, my comment is actually related to Charlie's comment. Again, using Taiwan as an example, when Taiwan implemented the national health insurance in 1995, in terms of the transition costs or startup costs, they didn't start from the scratch because prior to 1995, Taiwan already have at least 4 different branches of government insurance: the public employee insurance, the labor insurance, the farmers insurance, the fishermen's insurance. So these were all separate government entity. So when they implemented the national health insurance, they simply integrated all those former bureaucracy who are in charge. Again, those insurance are not just health insurance. The former insurance, they also include pension and other insurance. But they simply integrated all the staff who were involved in health insurance part of the labor insurance, public employee insurance, etc., into the national health insurance. And so I think we have to keep in mind when we get this started, in terms of startup costs, we are not starting from scratch. There are the current OHP and other state agencies staff who have been involved in benefit in insurance. They can be integrated, as well as the bureaucracy, part of the bureaucracy can be integrated. So keep in mind, we are not starting from scratch.
Yep. No, that's a great point.
I think one of that's a really good point. And I also think it's a challenge too here in the States that our governments just don't have sufficient reserves in this area. I mean, in healthcare, kind of as a rule, Medicaid, or North Carolina was the only state we'd found that had any kind of substantial healthcare reserve, and it was only $500 million. But it's a good point. I think it's it's still a challenge to find the reserve funding.
Okay, so this other separate distinct idea here is whether or not we would start portions of the UHP tax prior to the plan going into effect. Think of this as basically to say like, well, there will be these transition costs, right, that we have to do it. And to the extent that Charlie and Chenwei have articulated that we can simply just say, hey, these aren't new costs. These are system dollars and we're just repurposing them for this new thing that we're going to do. But in this case, this is really about the sort of, well, you may need additional dollars. You may need dollars to seed the program on day one so you're ready to go, right, and build those up. So what would this look like, right? So think of it as like certain elements of taxes, certain smaller rates of taxes that would go into this system. And Jeff, let me just get this last one and then I'll kind of come back to you. The last one here, right, is think of this as, well, maybe that's for one reason unfeasible politically, technically, and really what we have to do is simply just borrow these dollars on the open market, right? So in that case, we're basically saying, great, we'll get our 7 to 20 billion on day one because we've issued some sort of debt to that, probably not just the corporation, but also the state, or maybe some combination of financing that also includes revenue bonds. But in the end, right, you're really encumbering your cash flow going forward. So you need to actually have some sort of additional revenue to sort of pay that back. And so to me, that future obligation, right, has to be offset with some sense of kind of what the change in the overall operating plan has to be outside of the expenses, but also to cover your debt service. So we have to you would have to refigure kind of that with some additional debt service for some limited part of time. Go ahead, Jeff.
Thank you. I appreciate your comment about the repaying the debt. And something I always keep in mind is whenever you do something, it's if we do this, what don't we do? And just given the context of what's going on in the state right now. And then the second comment is collecting the money in advance. We've seen how well the idea of collecting tolls to pay for the interstate bridge replacement in advance of the interstate bridge has gone over. And, the interstate bridge needs to be replaced. I'm just right out front. But I think the idea in theory is good, but in practice has a huge hurdles to overcome.
Great. Thanks, Jeff. So I'm going to end with not going through these slides because I think they are pretty self-evident, right? We have to kind of think about what the target is, how we should fund it or phase it in, where should it come from, right? To what extent do we borrow or simply pay as you go, or some combination of these things? So I think the way I'd like to end it here is what would you advise is being kind of the next step here for this group to sort of try to advance this conversation to get to some level of a sort of consensus approach to tackling this? Go ahead, Charlie.
So one thing would be, to the extent that you can, to sort of answer some of Jeff's questions of how much money could you raise by this, that, or the other thing? How much money is, we did get a number for the rainy day fund. How much money is in there? We could look at how much money is annually comes from the public employers that is above and beyond what they would have to pay in new taxes in our current system. And so just putting some numbers to some of that. And I think there were some other places where there's some numbers that can be estimated. And I don't, it's been mentioned before, but I don't think it was really brought up today. And that is reserves that are currently in the system. For example, either reserves or surplus, which, both things I think should be thought about. There is money, for example, in the CCOs that potentially needs a law change for us to be able to get it, but maybe that's what we propose is a law change to get it. So there's also money that John has mentioned. He may mention it again, related to other things that are not CCOs, but either provider systems, hospital systems, or insurers that are nonprofit. So there's a variety of things. And if we can get estimates of what is out there for those, that would be useful. So.
Yeah. So I think, Charlie, what if I'm hearing you right, is think of it as what's our ability to harness dollars that are already in the system is kind of like, I think of it as basically part, you know, the foundation of our sort of capital stack for funding this.
Yeah.
And because then you want to say, well, what are the trade-offs on trying to get that next level of cost, you know, or access that next layer of dollars perhaps that aren't currently in the system. All right, go ahead, John.
Yeah, I also think it would be good to take into account that the reality is that the 4 million citizens and residents of Oregon aren't going to come into this at the same time, in all likelihood. You know, for myself, I think unless there's a Medicaid waiver, at least that we can start with, you know, the point I'm trying to make is that it's likely a portion of the population would come in, and so it wouldn't be 20 billion. It might be 3 billion or 5 billion for that portion, and then of course, I would think it's going to occur over 2 to 4 years. I think some of the issues that Helen mentioned earlier are true, and ERISA covered employers will have to agree to come in. So, you know, that may take 2 to 4 years for that to occur. And Medicare folks may have to have an option of traditional Medicare. So it may be a while before, you know, that entire population comes in. So the point I'm making is I don't think it's very likely that at any one point in time we would need 20 billion. But we will need a significant number. You know, so looking at that. As Charlie said, I do have some suggestions about nonprofits that are involved in healthcare that may or may not be workable, but we've seen that idea surface elsewhere than around this, and I think it's worthwhile at least talking about it. But it will require some time to talk about it, not today.
Great. I'll just kind of append what John said, something that was been rattling around in my mind here around obviously the timing of this, but it's really the population, because think of it as to the extent that you have Medicare, Medicaid, like to what extent do you really need 1 to 3 months of reserves to cover those, right, you know, reimbursements to providers, right? Versus, you know, where, you know, you have the whole employed and self-employed population and other unemployed population coming over, you might need a little more, right, closer to maybe that 3 months to cover some of the volatility with respect to sort of payments and the timing of the taxes. Right. So I think that's something we can just kind of layer into some of the issues in putting this together. I would say, as we put this together, is there a committee member who's interested or two to kind of review some of this stuff, just so we can help, given the sort of shortness of time, be willing to kind of offer some time to kind of work with Sarah and I just as we put this together, just so we can advance things a little faster than we would otherwise be able to. Charlie, is that a volunteer or a question?
Well, maybe some of the more of a question at this point. So one, it would be useful as you're working on it to, I think, share it with all of the members of the committee and get feedback from all of them. It would probably also useful for you if there were some particular people who would want to meet with you sort of off, you know, out of the meeting time and delve into it more. And at this point, I'm going to say I'm not volunteering, but I would love to see it as it goes through, as it's going along.
Yeah, for sure. I think a point here is like we're short on time, so we have to do this. But I think just like somebody who wants to help, kind of like stare over our eye and go like, yeah. Why don't we just
I'll help out.
Frame it. All right, Richard. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and I'm willing to help.
All right, John. I'll sign both of you two up for that. Great. I'm going to stop and move on to our next topic. How am I doing on time, Cheryl?
We were going to break at 10:30.
Okay, well, this is a short one, so let me go quick. This is just
we could spend a few more minutes than that, though.
Great.
Yeah.
Because I know the next topic will be lots of questions. Oh, I saw there's a question from Bethany. Oh, sorry. There we go. Okay. Great. Well, I'm gonna. This is stuff you've seen. I don't gonna spend much time. This is mostly just for a completeness of the deck. But I do want to touch here. Step one, right? I think, as everybody knows, is we've been working off a 2020 an Optimus plan that we kind of normalized to 2022 for tax data, and now we have a new plan cost, and we want to sort of bring that current with what Milliman has provided is through plan design, right? And I think the two things that are important to kind of focus in on in this process, what we're trying to do in the step one, is to normalize the current plan to what we've been solving for a revenue replacement target from the Optimus work. And so a lot of that starts with table 8 and table 11 in the Optimus report. And it's a little confusing because they use kind of sources and uses a little interchangeably, that basically are trying to say the plan will cost this much because we can look at sort of what we've been spending on it, but we think that spending and revenues should be on a one-to-one basis, right? So therefore, we can then get to a revenue replacement target by focusing on all the ESI, out-of-pocket costs, other state and local contributions that are paying for healthcare, and put that into sort of some type of tax plan. I'll pause real quick. Charlie, you probably have a quick thought.
So I would like to go back to the slide that was in your deck had the 2019 and 2022 numbers in it.
Yeah.
Because I have a number of comments. So yeah, this one. So I just sort of want to point out some things that, that both the 2019 and 2022 numbers in this particular slide include long-term supports and services for Medicaid. And the plan is not going to do that. So that's an adjustment to this. Another thing is that other private revenue that pays for healthcare is mostly left out. And so that includes things like workers' comp and property and casualty insurance part. And one of the reasons that we did not put that in as we need to raise revenue to do that is because, I'd sort of put out a question at one point of, is operations going to look at this? And one of the possibilities is that workers' comp still collects money the way it does now that would for the medical portion of workers' comp, but that rather than paying it out to providers, they just pay that to the state plan. Now that's one way it could be done, but another way is, you just don't pay so much for workers' comp as you would now, and then the state, we have to raise more taxes for that. So and that has never been decided. So I just sort of want to put a pin into that's something that the transition committee is probably going to have to look into, is how do you deal with that? And I already mentioned that TRICARE is not included in this. And to Cheryl's comment about there is certainly VA is going to exist with separate facilities, but there certainly is VA paying for care in facilities that everybody else uses too. And so a question would be, can we get the money from the VA in some manner into the system, into our system, or do the providers bill the VA separately from the state plan? And so that kind of operational decision or provider reimbursement decision, I guess, maybe has not yet been made, but just sort of want to put a pin in that one too, that's something that's going to need to be thought about. And then a couple of slides further along, I have some questions. Let's see, it's related to
Charlie, before you get to
Um,
that, can I just address your
yeah, go
subrogation
ahead.
question?
Yeah.
Sorry, just very briefly, just if people have the opportunity to look at it, there was a proposal put forth in the operations committee just about that, about subrogation. And so I'd encourage people to take a look at that. And that proposal is going to come before the board at the next board meeting. So would love you all to, when you have the chance, take a look at that. Thanks.
Okay, great. And that is that in the board meeting,
So it's
the
in the
upcoming board meeting
currently,
stuff?
it will be. That hasn't, the board meeting is not till the 19th, so it hasn't been posted yet, but it would be available in the
It will be,
operations
okay.
committee. It is there now in the operations committee, the most recent meeting.
Oh, okay, great. And so I think one of the slides, so
Do you know what number it is?
previous slides, so it was like a couple more slides back where it deals with Medicaid saving. Oh, yeah, that's the slide, the 22. Yeah, that one. So the last number on there, it's not really so much reduced Medicaid transfers under recent federal law. I mean, it is some of that, but at the time we were making these estimates, we had no clue as to what was really going to happen. And so I would say it's not really, that number doesn't really take into account those. And it's still difficult to figure out what that number is. Just to put that out there, is we still don't really know what that the most conservative estimate would be with the 22 numbers. So so in two slides more. Oh, I know that. Yeah. So this one, at some point, I will maybe make some more analysis of this, but the amount of savings by excluding Medicare is way overblown because, I mean, it is not. Well, I guess it's maybe a difference in spending for the plan, but and I think even that is wrong. But we really have to consider what's the overall spending for healthcare in the state. And so it's not really that much different in the plan itself because, Medicare is going to have to pay a whole bunch of money to the state or to providers, either one. So anyway, I will do more analysis on that and I'll stop there.
Okay. Well, I'm going to move us along just real quick. So in the Optimus work, remember, they moved from table 8 to table 11 to figure out sort of what it would cost, what it might cost under a single payer system, and then tried to do this sort of like map of where the dollars would be transferable and or where they would need to kind of make it up. So they kind of embedded the transferability question with the revenue replacement piece. Going further, the work that Charlie has done here, right, has been then to take that sort of what does the plan cost, what dollars may be transferable, and then what revenue do we really need to replace, right? This has been our tax modeling piece that this group has gone through. And the implicit assumption right here is that we're making the redirection of those existing federal, state, and kind of local public health care funds, right, redirected into the UHP, right, that has all the Medicaid, Medicare payments, some of the public sector healthcare spending, and that we're trying to then seize on the replacement of those private premiums, charity care, out-of-pocket dollars, and figure out what it would mean. So now I would say, and this is the work that is currently in place, and so we've been chatting with Milliman to try to tee this up in the sense of can we really understand the current plan within the framework that we've been working from the Optimist to get to our revenue replacement? And I think the simple way to understand this then is do all those key pieces still hold? And then when we recompute the revenue replacement target, are we really still solving for the same level of contributions that we're trying to replace today? Or are there other, call them sort of like deficits with respect to the transferability and plan costs that we need to make sure that we're paying attention to going forward. And so this is kind of a great sort of maybe transition to the conversation in the back half of this meeting. And this is something right now, the coordination that's happening with Milliman is to try to do this with their piece. And I don't want to speak too much for Fritz and Ken, but we believe that's possible for the most part to be able to kind of look at the 2026 plan that they put forward relative to an optimist 2026 plan, so that we can think about our 2022 estimate relative to that and scale the economy, so we can have this conversation around, is the tax structure and tax plan that we've come forward with today still make sense for the plan that is being talked about for 2032? I'll pause. Charlie.
So go back to the slide that mentioned Medicare Part B and D premiums.
Yeah.
So I would take out the Part D, because we don't expect Part D is going to continue. So just Part B.
Yep. Thank you.
But there's a little bit of Part A. A few people actually pay Part A, but it's a pretty small number. But that would have to continue as well. So
great. So this is mostly just as an update to you, work that's happening, right now. And the idea is for our next meeting to be able to have that recalibration conversation around, well, how does our revenue replacement target look with the new plan? And what do we need to talk about as part of that sort of calibration? Great. Go ahead, John.
Just one factor as I read some of the materials. I mean, we may want to include in our analysis that if there isn't at least X amount of coverage of the Medicaid population, then this isn't feasible. Only when federal conditions are such that, when I look back at the task force was 2022, when all the emergency rules were in play. The state was covering an enormous number of people under Medicaid. And actually, to their credit, the state continued to do that as long as it possibly could until the federal government required the emergency to come off. And then now the big, beautiful bill has change things. So one thing I think we might want to consider is a Medicaid coverage gap. The reality is for legislators is only when you can get to the point where the feds will go back to covering a much higher portion of Medicaid folks. Is this feasible?
Great point. Thank you, John. We'll keep track of that as we kind of move this forward. But maybe a preview of the conversation in a couple weeks. Any other last thoughts or questions? This is mostly just meant as an update to bring everybody current to kind of where we are. Once this is in place, I would just say expect Charlie and Richard also to kind of be working on sort of that to help us kind of get a good conversation for our meeting in 2 weeks. But just so everybody kind of knows what the workflow is here between now and then. Great. Oh, go ahead, Mary Lou.
Any estimate on how many hours, days, whatever we might have this information before the meeting? I mean, things are very frustrating to a lot of us, and I know you're working so hard, all of you, trying to get this stuff to us as quickly as possible. But these meetings, and all of a sudden, I get a note this morning, did you see the stuff that was posted at 2:35 yesterday afternoon? And no, I didn't. And so I'm looking at it, 15 minutes before, trying to assimilate some of this. So anyway, I guess this is just, thank you so much for what you're doing. But if we could have any of the materials, even
So
days before.
I'll let Fritz and update as part of the when we come back. But the idea was basically we would hope to have that reconciliation table this week. That would give us a little bit of time
Yes.
for Charlie and Richard and I to kind of review once we get that, and then get whatever we can get out in advance of that. And I think the minimum would be like, are we in a big gap situation, little gap situation, and what does that mean relative to our structure? So I think,
Thank you.
and anything we can do analytically to advance that, we'll do. But yes, I would say, yeah, I'm working on the assumption of even a little bit information in advance is better than a lot of information with short time periods. So
Yes.
we'll push out whatever we can.
Thank you.
Okay, well,
Back to you,
I
Sean.
can't believe you got us to the break that fast. I was looking at the
I talk
slides. Okay, so we will break and come back at 10:45. Thanks, everybody. Hi, everyone. We're back from break. I just wanted to point out the references that Mimi put in the chat. Thanks so much for doing that. This next portion we've scheduled for about an hour, believing there's a lot of information there, a lot of questions to respond to. So I'm just going to hand it over to our Milliman consultant. So probably that's Fritz. Yes. See if he's there.
I am here.
There you are.
Sorry about that. Couldn't get up fast
Yeah,
enough.
I'll hand it over to you. Go for it.
Okay, and I'm going to hand it over to Ken. He's going to lead the discussion, and I'll do color commentary here.
All right, sounds good. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, I was going to ask someone to unmute me. There we go. All right, and I'll share. Okay. So where we last left off, a few weeks ago, after seeing a lot of the questions that you sent over our way, and responding to the answers, Fritz and I thought it would be is that working now?
Yep. Now it's just about to share. Thank you.
Okay, great. Fritz and I thought it'd be a good idea to go to kind of recap, because we think part of the issue with some of the questions is that, we followed kind of a storytelling when working with the Plan Design and Expenditure Committee, where we started our projection, and we went through exactly how we did it in November, and then based on some of the feedback, we made some changes, and we really only went over the changes with that group in November, in December, and then going into January. So I think this committee was diving a little bit into detail on some numbers that had some changes. So we just wanted to reset here a little bit and do a quick presentation where it's a lot of the concepts from our November presentation, but making sure that all the numbers in there are updated, so there are our current projections, our current best estimates, and current estimates for both baseline all the way through the 2032 UHP implementation. One second here. Okay, there we go. So just again, starting out with our caveats, and I'll go right into so everyone understands how exactly we developed our UHP expenditure estimates. We start with our baseline. So we project our baseline population expenditures. We move that up to 2026, where we have a comparison point to Optimus, and then we project forward to 2032 status quo. And once we get to status quo, we project to the UHP. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because I think everyone here is familiar with these concepts. But just to give an idea of the types of adjustments we're making in here, our baseline, we have a number of sources that we're developing from, and I think a lot of you have already been doing your due diligence and reviewing some of our sources and asking some great questions on that. Going to 2026, we have a little bit of cost trends, some population changes, and a few one-time impacts, such as some of the MIAR and recent federal government impacts. And then in projecting to 2032, we have further population changes and more and further cost trends, which we use national health expenditures in Oregon data for that for as our basis on cost trend, and we use Oregon specific projections for population growth as well. And then to convert the status quo over to the UHP, we apply the UHP impacts. There's that PEB, what we're referring to as that PEB plus plan, which includes the dental, vision, and fertility. There's the adverse selection, which has already been debated here in length. There's our induced utilization from the increase in richness of benefits and people utilizing more often and more frequently. And then there's additional costs that we have to project for, like things such as GLP-1s, just changes in drug pipelines and things of that nature that we get into our projection. So that's just to set the stage. So in our baseline, again, wanted to go over these numbers for our 2026 enrollment, because there were a few questions on the baseline enrollment. And I see Charlie already has his hand up.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask you a question, because on this slide you say that the duals are included in Medicare, and I think on the next slide the duals are included in Medicaid, and the numbers are such that I actually think they might be included in both places. And so let's see, not that next slide. I don't know what the slide that I saw that was next on the deck as it was put forward yesterday. But anyway, just going back to this one, actually maybe it's slide 9. So on slide 7, my number said 7 when I saw it, but I guess it's 6. So on slide 6 right now, it says, oh, that's it. Yeah. So this one says that the duals are included with Medicaid, and the other one said they were included with Medicare. And when I look at the numbers that you get, it almost looks like they're included in both places. And to me, that might be why the numbers for the enrollment in non-public employer-sponsored insurance might be off. So anyway, I just had a question related to that. So
yeah, so Ken, would you just go down one slide where it has, I think that documentation note is wrong. We need to change that. Go right there. There on Medicaid, it says it includes duals. And I think that's wrong. And actually we put it in Medicare.
Yeah, well, they're in Medicare now. They were originally in Medicaid in that November presentation. We just need to update that note.
Yeah. But I do want to, I want to camp on that idea for just a second. We've actually quadruple checked this number because I had the same question. At this point, we can't really explain why the employer is as low as it is. All of our sources are public sources, and in particular, we use Medicaid. We get that from the OHA website, which breaks out their count of the duals. It's and their number is the 1360 there, and we anybody can go out and do this. You can explicitly click the buttons to not include duals, and it will give you this number. Then we used CMS to get the Medicare number. When I was reviewing this the other day, we went back. Ken and I did it together for like the 4th time. And the file that CMS gives you explicitly breaks it out. And it gives you roughly the same number as what appears on the OHA website. So to your point, it would appear that both sources will count them. And you don't want to count them in both places. And we believe have been, but anybody on the call can go and double check our numbers because all the sources are there. So we believe we have it right.
Yeah, and just
I will look again, but I'm pretty sure that they are double counted. But I will check once more. The other piece on the Medicaid, there, I mean, it is all OHP, and the numbers look right for OHP, but it's not all Medicaid because some of it is the Oregon Healthier Oregon plan, which are not essentially covered by the federal dollars. So, which doesn't really matter for this, probably for this purpose, but it matters when we're trying to figure out what revenue needs to be replaced and what revenue is going to come from the federal government. So we need to,
Precisely. Yep.
yeah.
yeah,
So,
just,
but
just
I will check those again. But I'm really pretty sure that the duals are counted twice, both in Medicare and Medicaid with these numbers. So.
Charlie, I know you're concerned about that. What you should look at, so the Medicaid number, that's OH, like we said, it's OHA, and that's going to be, it's going to be the Medicaid plus, like you said, the basic health plan plus CHIP. So, and that's about, if you look at December, that's about 1.34 million. So the Medicare numbers maybe where you should go check. If you go to say CMS and you go to the latest CMS report, it says that there are 960,000 Medicare eligibles in Oregon. So
And some of those are duals, though. That's what I'm saying is that about 170,000 of those are duals.
Correct, but the duals are not in Medicaid, and about 170,000 of those are, and those are in Medicare. So I understand where you're coming from with your.
Okay, I'll look again.
Yeah, I understand. I also understand where you're coming from with your source I'm sorry, the DCBS. Is that correct? So I understand
Well,
where
I'm using the same sources. So for
I'm
Medicaid, I'm using OHP. I mean, I'm using that same thing that you're using. For Medicare, I'm using CMS numbers, and I'm also using CMS numbers for Medicaid. So I'm double checking the OHP numbers with that. But it's the DCBS is for the overall. So yeah.
Yeah. And so, if we just take the CMS that number in Oregon is 963,000 as of December. So there's just,
Right.
I saw your DCBS numbers; they are higher. It's just it becomes a matter of which one of these sources is over reporting, right? So I think the numbers are like there's no the duals are in Medicare, and you can go back to that 963,000 source, and you can give us your opinion on it for certain. And but there's just an issue here where in order to get back to the total Oregon population, either the DCBS source or the OHA or the Medicare is slightly overreported and does not really. It's tough to know which one is overreported.
Yeah. And where this
I'll send my detailed information to you. So yeah.
Yeah, that'd be great. And I think where this ultimately makes a difference, it does make a difference. It's not enormously material. What it does end up doing, where it would affect future analysis, is number one, if you're wanting to know what the composite, for example, provider reimbursement as a percentage of Medicare is. So we have an example in here in this slide that kind of calculates, okay, well, Medicare is at 100% of Medicare, Medicaid is at 88, what have you. And Ken will go through that in a minute. Well, the weights on that, if you shift from Medicare or Medicaid over to employer, it does change that because employers paid at a higher percent of Medicare. So ultimately what it does is it will change that view, and then it would change the total projected expenditures as well, because if let's say there's not as many in Medicare as what we show here, well, that means they're an employer, which is going to be about $400 to $500 PMPM lower than Medicare.
And that's what I think is going on to me. I think it's because the double counting that the employer number, which is essentially gotten by subtraction of everything, should actually be higher by pretty much the number of duals that are there. But I will go through that once more and send you the details of what I'm doing. So and see how we come out with that. So
all
thanks.
right, very good. Yep.
Actually, I did have another comment related to that, and that's it seems like TRICARE is not included, which may be good or may be appropriate or not. But anyway, it just to recognize that it's not. I think that it's not.
It is not.
It is not. Yeah, and also whatever portion of that the VA spends for care in non-VA facilities is also not included. And again, I'm not sure if it should be or how we should deal with that, but just to acknowledge that it's not included, I guess. And the other part that's not included, which I brought up earlier is related to medical expenditures by the workers' comp and property and casualty insurance, and I'm pretty sure that that's not included either. And I'm not sure what we do with that at this point, but I have to look at some of the stuff that Mimi had mentioned to see. But anyway, just to make sure that you're also not including that. Is that correct?
It is not. It is the. I believe this is one of the questions that we answered in the question document. Workers' comp is not included. P&C is only included insofar as there is subrogation between, currently subrogation between health plans and automobile liability policies.
Okay. Okay.
So it would be net of that inside. We would assume that would continue. Is essentially what we're saying. Is under UHP, we would assume subrogation would continue.
Okay. Thanks.
All right. I'm gonna move forward then. I'm not gonna spend any more time on this slide, but all the sources. Just again, I'll go through this quickly in the effort of time, but just these are the adjustments that we're specifically applying to each market between the initial base data and all the way up to 2032. So I think Medicaid's the big one where it declines the HR1 impacts. We put a 19% reduction in there. I'll keep going. Because I think this slide was of particular interest to this group. So this is our 2026 allowed claims. And just to set the stage for what allowed claims are any claims for covered services. So that would, if you think of something like whatever doctor visit, if the doctor visit costs $100 and there's a $30 copay, so the plan pays $70 and the individual pays $30. That full $100 is what's represented in here. So I think there may be a few questions on that, and that's I don't know if there are any further. So I think Richard, you have your hand up.
Yeah. Well, when you do the PMPM, it's another way of arriving at total expenditures.
Mm-hmm.
And is there a slide where you compare? But the idea of PMPM is you have total number of people covered at different rates by different markets, and then you add it all up to get an estimate of total expenditures. That's one way of doing it. And then another way of doing total expenditures is starting with different reporting from different groups, or the NHEA, which estimates the amount spent in private insurance, amount spent by persons, individuals, amount spent by Medicare, Medicaid, that sort of thing. And that's another way of arriving at total expenditures. So is there a place where we compare what the PMPM gives us versus the other? Because in Oregon, we don't have good numbers. The APAC is not a good source for overall expense. It's a good source of cost of care, because the self-insured, which aren't reported or only reported about 40% in the Oregon's APAC, that gives you a sense of what commercial insurance is paid, and you can extend that to self-insured, but that doesn't give you a good enrollment numbers. You have to go to the DC Best enrollment numbers. So there's a lot of fudging there, which is how we have to do it in Oregon. But is there a place where you compare the PMPM total amount, the total amount derived from PMM versus total amount arrived by other methods? Because I'm unsure why we go back and forth with the PMPM part.
Oops, sorry.
I can
Sorry about
start responding to that. Yeah, are you gonna, Ken?
Sorry.
Were you?
I clicked the button. Sorry.
We have one slide in here. I think the best comparison that maybe gets at what you're saying is our comparison, sort of our waterfall chart that shows how we compare to the Optimus report
Yeah.
And I think the reason that gets the closest is because the Optimus report, well, first of all, it should be, I think this was pretty clear to PD&E, but again, we're here trying to explain this to F&R. So it should be, I want to make this really clear. The Optimus report uses the sort of the second methodology that you mentioned, Richard, which they use they start with national health expenditures. We did not follow that. So our methodology, which national health expenditures is going to have, basically premium, right, is what is spent, and so that's going to have an admin component in it, and some things like that. Our methodology starts by using public sources to find out what is paid under these particular forms of coverage. So this is the what would be considered the benefit expense amount. What is paid to, say, an employee under their benefit plan. And then so we get all of those estimates of what we would call claims costs or allowed costs, that the full amount that's going to the provider. This is the medical costs underneath a policy. And then a second Milliman team is working on the expenses. And in the end here, we end up melding those two together to figure out how much the UHP is going to cost in both benefit expense and admin, with those two components broken out. The difficulty that we had with the Optimus report and actually reconciling it, so to speak, is they don't really have a fixed number, for example, that they are saying, okay, well, of the 55 billion that they think is the cost at that time, how much of that is admin? How much of it was benefit expense? What they do is take all of the expenditures and then they increment off of that. They make and enumerate a long list of changes, starting with this base number off of the NHE, and then they increment for different things that they think will be different over time, for different things that will be different under the UHP. And that is not exactly the way we did it. So we've done the best that we can to sort of reconcile our numbers with their numbers.
Yeah.
And there is a slide in here, and I'm going to stop because I see Charlie wants to ask a question.
Yeah. So I've got a question. I'm not quite sure what it means for allowed claims for uninsured. So I mean, what does that mean exactly? Because they aren't, it's like there's not a claim there, so I'm not sure what that means. So just can you help with me with that?
Yeah, you're right. It is, in this case, there is that exception sitting out there, right? It's like, well, uninsured there's no plan liability because they don't have a plan. Right. So this is an estimate of what their experience is. Okay. You can see it's much lower.
Right.
And so so the reason we want to put that in there is because ultimately that, they will be covered under UHP.
Okay, that makes sense, because so now I understand it better.
Yeah.
And so going back to the NHEA analysis, we have done the analysis where we break out the administrative costs. So that does exist from our standpoint, and that's how we can try to reconcile what's going on here. So we will make that attempt. So yeah.
And NHEA sources and uses, on the uses side, they break out admin expense versus personal healthcare. So NHEA already does that admin breakout.
Yeah. Okay. And I would say that we in our technical report, obviously we've done our best to try to, we obviously have poured over the Optimus report, but it won't really be up to us to necessarily explain everything about what Optimus did, because it's not our report. I doubt that our actual report, our technical report, will contain anything on any kind of a reconciliation between those two, because we can't speak for their report. However, for these purposes today, we did feel, since the Optimus report is the anchor point that everybody has had, I totally understand it. It's very difficult to dislodge that when that's when you've been using for the last 18 months or 24 months or whatever. So we do have an attempt to reconcile those numbers, and Ken will go over that here in a little bit later.
Yeah. All right. Is it okay if I keep going then? Again, just want to show all the sources.
Ken, I'm sorry. Can you back up one? I think it's important to know one thing on this. Just to speak to the 16.1%, a lot of that, as you can see, is driven by the Medicaid, which removes LTSS.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, I was going to mention that the Optimus numbers do include LTSS.
That's
and
right.
And your numbers don't. So yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, so there's that going on, and then there is a little bit of mix, as we would call it. Again, Optimus didn't have the same. We just talked about this, the difference in between the markets. Okay, so there is a little bit of that, and then generally the numbers are lower than Optimus because our numbers will not have any component of admin in any of the premiums, and theirs would. So that's why you see, 6.6 lower, 5.8 lower, because there is an element in there where ours is just the benefit expense at this point. Now we'll layer on the admin later.
Yeah. So I'll point out that there is admin expense in the Medicaid because the admin of the CCOs is included in that number, but that, it is an admin expense, but and it's not a provider admin, but it is different. So anyway, some of it is included, but mostly not. Yeah.
Okay, that I did not know that. That may be, we can talk about that a little further. Ken and I can take that back. That might be an adjustment then that we want to make. So we can take that back.
Okay.
That
Thanks.
would actually lower, that would lower the expense.
Yeah.
So, all right, now you can go, Ken. Sorry about that.
Now we got one more
Jeff has
question.
a question.
Good,
Oh,
thank
sorry,
you.
Jeff. Go ahead. Yeah.
Not a problem. Fritz and Ken, thank you for the material and the presentation you're making. Question I have is, what assumptions are being made about the number of doctors and nurses going forward? Is it the same allocation between doctors and nurses in total as we currently have? And what kind of pay assumptions are being made with the total number of doctors and nurses, both broadly and then specifically to general practitioner and specialty as a simple breakout?
Yeah. We don't make any explicit assumptions on that. That was outside of our scope. It would be probably a standalone analysis to actually look at all of that in detail and then apply some type of an elasticity curve that would say, well, if the number of physicians goes down, what does that do for utilization and et cetera? So we essentially assume essentially status quo on the actual provider count, because we just don't make an assumption on that. It doesn't factor into our modeling.
I appreciate that. Thank you. The reason I asked is that we've had discussions about increasing the number of general practitioners and potentially putting limits on or different assumptions on what specialists are being paid. So if that's not being factored in, that I believe has the potential of being if you will, a non-trivial number.
You mean up or down, Jeff, in terms of increasing?
Up.
Yeah. Okay.
Not only up, but also with respect to the supply of people providing the service.
Okay. I think I may follow up with you. I think that may be, we will almost certainly have a section in our technical report that will talk about some of these things. For example, I guess we call it considerations, right? That could cause these estimates to vary from what we projected in there. And I think that's a really good point that we would want to at least mention that in the report, that this is a potential upward pressure on costs.
Thank you for mentioning one of my favorite words, elasticity.
Oh, okay. I thought it was going to be upward pressure, but elasticity is good too. So I like that word.
I'll take all three.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead, Ken.
The only thing I'd add to that too is there'll be additional considerations in there. When we looked at induced utilization, we did end up capping aspects of induced utilization because of the current provider situation in Oregon. If there it would, when we did that, we looked at it by region. So I think that would, any changes there would also weigh into that assumption as well. So.
Well, and the reason I'm bringing it up, and I've focused on this in previous meetings about the number of doctors, number of nurses. When I go visit my doctor or my dentist or my ophthalmologist and I get my bill, most of that bill is going toward their pay. And don't get me wrong, I'm after backing out the reimbursements, all that. I'm just looking at the total. Most of that's going toward their pay. I'm fine with it. And I believe as we as a committee should try and get a good handle on that, as opposed to I'm glad you're going to mention it as a footnote. I'd rather have it more, upfront and more discussion. But if that's not going to be the case, then so be it.
Okay. I'm going to keep going. Again, all of the sources here to look at. Fritz already mentioned that. Oh, Charlie already raised your hand. Can't hear you. Can't hear you, Charlie.
You're on mute, Charlie.
Great, thanks. Yeah, so you actually do mention it in the slide about state-directed payments, but when you actually take state-directed payments into account, Medicaid is reimbursed essentially at about the same rate as Medicare. And you mentioned there's $2 billion there, and 88%, but when you put it together, it actually ends up it's about the same. And when you look at detailed hospital data, Medicare and Medicaid basically have the same ratio of net patient revenue to charged charges. So it's kind of mentioned here, but I just wanted to point out that, yeah, they're about the same, really.
Yeah, so this is I mean, we can come back. We can think through that more. I mean, this is more to give an estimate of overall reimbursement to the state, to give the board, both the PD&E committee and the board, an idea of current reimbursement levels, and if there were to be, if something to be if there would be consideration to lower that full statewide reimbursement, what would the impact be? So I just want to, I guess what I'm getting at with that is that it wouldn't impact our projections, because our projections are agnostic of provider reimbursement. Fritz, did I miss anything there?
No.
He said no. Okay.
Okay.
So this is our and that's also helpful because we'll probably be, if that's more like 100%, we're probably gonna be more at the upper end of that 110 or 122 range, especially since the Medicaid population is so high. So going over to the projection from 2026 to status quo. Not seeing any hands up yet. But again, we have those market movements, and then we that were explained in the slide previous. So you see the large drop in Medicaid, and then the large increase in uninsured as people move from Medicaid to uninsured. And then we apply population growth, which varies by market, as according to the population growth estimates, Oregon's Medicare population is aging more rapidly than the rest of the state, increasing the number of Medicare people enrolled in Medicare relative to the increases in the rest of the markets. Are there any questions on this?
And I believe, I'll just add a comment to that was not an adjustment, the 8.6 on the population growth. I don't believe that Optimus's report had that type of a growth factor on Medicare. So that would be another, at least one difference there between us and Optimus.
Yeah, and I think that also is part of what's driving that first 2026 baseline, where they had 823,000, I think, projected in 2026 in Medicare. I think that's part of what's driving that difference. And then, Charlie, got your hand up?
Yeah. So I did look at this fairly carefully, and I'm not quite sure where you got the trend numbers from. And maybe it's Oregon specific ones, but when I look at national health expenditure trends from 26 to 2032, it looks like the total expenditure increases when you take into account the total per member per month expenditure increases are roughly about 5% annually rather than and so lower than the low trend here. But that is national numbers. So are there specific Oregon numbers that would say the trend is going to be substantially higher in Oregon than nationally?
Are you talking about for low or high? So I guess to go back, we're not using the national, we're not using the NHE 24 to 2032 trend. We're using we excluded some COVID years because of the strangeness that happened then. But we're using like 30 years of NHE trend, like the retrospective trend.
Well, so what I'm looking at is the 2026 to 2032 trend. And so when you look at
we did not take their trends specifically. We
Yeah,
looked
okay.
we looked at historical trends. We excluded COVID years and
Okay.
kind of got a range on that.
Oh, okay. So I would say that that's a possibility, but another possibility would be to say, NHEA has looked very carefully at the trends, and their numbers are saying that it's about 5%, which means to me the low trend should probably be about 4%, the high trend should be about 6%, which doesn't sound like that much of a difference, but over the 6 years, it ends up being about 7%. So it ends up being 7%. So I would say that if you use NHEA projected numbers, that it ends up being about 7% over that time period less. And that might be something to think about doing, or you could, because I think that they have probably done more to, their actuaries have done a lot of work on trying to figure out those trends. And I don't think Oregon is probably any very different than the national trend. At least that's the best guess we can make. So
I think you're right. And Ken, correct me if I'm wrong. We actually did pull from the Oregon line, right?
Yeah.
So we do have that baked in. But what we'll do, I agree with you that small ticks here, small basis points over a long projection period can they compound. So I agree with you. It's worth a second look, and we'll go back and do that, and then we can report back.
Thank you.
John?
Yeah, can I just confirm here that employer number of 900,000 some folks covered by employer, which I think you said briefly that you did check that number because it was so different from Optimus. And it's different to the tune of 400,000 people. And so using that number going forward is going to have a very significant impact. And I just need to put on my list, why was there that huge difference between people having employer-based insurance in the two?
Yeah, I think that some of the difference is what's in public, because public is an employer too. And when you look at Optimus and baseline for both employer and public, the difference isn't that much. It's between about 1.6 million and 1.8 million. So which correlates with the DCBS large group, small group, ATM, and TRICARE. So I think when you look at public and employer together, the numbers aren't so far off. I think that I'm proposing that the difference is that some of those public employers are counted under employers in one setting and under public in the other setting. That's my thought. Thank you.
So no, actually, when you look at the numbers, it's not 400,000. It's probably about 300,000 different. So it is substantial. But I will look at that and send some information about what I'm finding. I sent some of it, but I'll do a little bit more careful and nuanced job of it, but it is a substantial number. And the unfortunate part is you can only get it, as far as I can tell, you can only get at that by subtraction. And so if the other numbers are wrong, that number's going to be wrong.
Right.
And I think that
you are correct. And I think we put on our slide, it's essentially the balancing item.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. Right.
That answer was one. John, you still have your hand up. Does that answer your questions? Okay. So yeah, projection of status quo, and that's all done. So we have some additional costs. I just want to go over the additional costs at the bottom real quick. So the numbers above, the public employer, individual by market. So that's medical and drug costs. It's exclusive of the behavioral health plus initiatives. And it's in status quo, it's exclusive of unreimbursed Medicaid for now. And it's also, I don't have a line for it because it's 0, but those numbers are exclusive of the dental and vision and fertility. So we stripped that out in order to make sure that we're not double counting them in the projection. And Charlie, you have your hand up?
Yeah. So I'm curious what unreimbursed Medicaid is and why that exists. So do you have an answer for that?
Ken, my recollection of that was that those were costs that came from, I don't recall the report.
That's from the community benefit report.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well,
we have a source on that, and our assumption was that just by definition that it's not contained in the costs that are reported.
Okay. And it's not a very big number, so I guess it doesn't matter too much.
Yeah.
Well, this is on a PMPM basis, so it's the community benefit report of 2025 indicated $1 billion of unreimbursed Medicaid.
Unreimbursed, yeah.
Yeah.
And Ken, I want to say we stripped that out as well. There was a larger number, but we stripped it down to really facility and professional cost basis, right?
Yeah, and I also think I also think it's important, like that unreimbursed Medicaid number. We don't just like add in like $1 billion back. We kind of assume that any of that is would be in our Medicaid projection and already in our induced utilization numbers. A couple more hands up, Cheryl.
I just want to note, I'm concerned about using the governor's budget for the behavioral health spending. I realize behavioral health is budget dust compared to about anything else, but I am concerned about using the entire budget for behavioral health for this estimate, because I do not believe our universal health plan will cover all the services provided through this funding. So, and I've expressed that concern to the other committee and to staff.
Yeah, I would say whatever feedback people have on that specific number, I think Fritz and I will take and absorb without a doubt.
Yeah, it was 900,000. It was I think the budget itself was 1.8 over 2 years, I believe, 1.8 billion.
Biennial, yeah.
And we just split that. We essentially split that difference.
Mm-hmm.
For
I can get back to you on that, but that just includes a whole lot of care, including the Oregon State Hospital, that I'm not certain will be included in our universal health plan coverage, honestly.
Yeah, I think we can put whatever, we rolled that in ultimately into the cost of UHP. If Ken, hold me true there. Did we ultimately include that amount? I just don't recall if we ended up rolling it into the UHP cost.
Yeah, we do, yes.
We did, yeah, okay, that's what I thought. And so we put these here just to note that, you know, it's not included right now, but it ultimately, for example, the unreimbursed Medicaid, we assume that's going to be covered under the UHP. You won't have unreimbursed Medicaid anymore. So that's why we put those there, is that these are going to be costs that you know, they're either budgeted for and they're going to be spent in the case of behavioral health, or it's being covered by, you know, other sources in the case of unreimbursed Medicaid.
Yeah,
I can send you more specifics on that. But I just do not believe some of the behavioral health services that we provide in the public system fall in the realm of this more medical type of care, health-related social needs, housing supports, transitions from levels of care, assistance to people who are incarcerated or somehow justice involved. So there's a lot of legal system work too. I just don't believe that will fall under the health plan.
Okay.
Yeah, if you have specific line items that you can point us to, I think that would be helpful.
Okay.
And Cheryl, isn't some of the governor's budget for residential beds, that's not services that won't represent Medicaid claims because it's a capital expense?
Yeah, the last couple of sessions, that funding, a big
65 million.
investments has come, more than that.
Yeah.
To build residential treatment facilities. It's not even for the operation.
Right. So that would not be included in
Right.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Ken, let's take a note of that. Let's make sure that we're treating that, you know, appropriately.
Yeah.
We should probably keep moving though. I think we've got some more we want to get through here. So
Yeah. And then getting to the draft UHP results from the status quo, our main adjustments are the increase in benefits, the dental and vision coverage, that induced utilization, and the discussed adverse selection. So we already have some hands up.
Yeah, so you had mentioned that you had no explicit assumption about more providers being there, but in my mind, you have an implicit assumption that there's going to be a whole lot more providers. I mean, if you're going to be paying 5.2 billion more for induced utilization and 1.9 billion more for adverse selection, that's got to require quite a few more providers in order to justify that much more payment. And so to me, you're implicitly assuming that there's going to be a whole bunch more providers in Oregon to take up those fees. I mean, so there's going to be some more care given because of savings in provider offices. Administrative savings in provider offices is not only going to be a savings of dollars, but it's also going to be a savings of provider time. And so they're going to be able to provide more care. But in order to have more expenses justified, there's going to have to be more providers to do that. So to me, this is an implicit assumption there's going to be a whole lot more providers.
I don't disagree with that, but I do think that there's been a lot of discussion on these calls about provider efficiency. And I think in my opinion, that's the part that's being underplayed here. So, you know, and we also had a slide in our probably our December deck, we can check though, that showed provider capacity, which was, you know, and I think we did it relative to other states, that it was not currently maxed out. Facilities in particular were not. Professionals are more, you know, it's harder to get a doctor appointment than it is to get an admin. They'll admit you pretty much right away. So I don't know that increase in adverse selection, the cost for that is all going to result in a need for more providers. Could part of it? Sure. I won't argue with that. But I think, again, being consistent with the efficiency arguments that have been made multiple times on some of these calls, I would say not all of that will be a need for providers.
Mary?
My question is, and maybe it's been covered in one of the plan design meetings that I haven't honestly read through everything that they've done, but what kind of dental coverage did you project in here? Because we know it can go from kind of like, some basic, cleanings and extractions and whatever up to, implants, for God's sake. So it's like, is there a document or something that can show me? Because that seems like an awful lot of money for the dental, and I just want to kind of understand a little bit more and where I should look for that.
Yeah, that is an awful lot of money for dental. And to answer your question, dental is also covered at full first dollar, so there's no cost sharing on dental. There are some maximums applied in dental, so things such as in dental plans, you would typically find lifetime max on orthodontia. So that's still being applied, but with your typical, three-tier dental plan, where some of the more expensive procedures are covered with a lot of cost sharing from the individual. Those are all being covered with no cost sharing. So that's which also leads to an increase in induced utilization in dental, though that is also the dental providers is also a concern. Did that answer your question?
Basically, yes, but I guess at some point if I could, and maybe that's PD&E, looking at what they're talking about. So anyway, I just kind of, it seemed like an awful lot to me. And I know vision coverage, various insurance people will argue that vision really shouldn't be an insured benefit, that, it's really, anyway, so I know it's a tiny piece. And anyway, just I think the biggest thing is the dental, and we'll deal with that later, I guess. Thank you.
Mhm.
So the dental, the 4.2 billion, is that above and beyond what the status quo has in for dental? Because to me, that's like the status quo, dental's already paid for by a lot of different people in a lot of different ways. And so it's already in the status quo. So is that an additional 4.2 billion beyond what
So
the status quo has?
I think to answer your question is we stripped dental out of the status quo. And we just add that dental cost on at the end.
Okay, so then I'll have to look a little bit more at the PMPM and try to figure out if that really looks like you're doing that for private insurers. So it doesn't seem like it to me, but yeah.
John?
Yeah, just a couple comments on induced utilization. I mean, we are in a status quo where the system is failing to deliver, especially primary care. We know, for example, from the legacy OHSU transaction that 22,000 people in the legacy medical group are waiting to be assigned a primary care doctor. We know that in some other medical groups, they have to wait up to a year for a primary care a doctor. We know from actually the days in which the CCOs were working more productively that the primary care model that's being used is capable of reducing hospital admissions by 5%. And Fritz, you just made the point. We've got a system that it's easy to get admitted, but hard to get a primary care doctor. And it's likely not possible for you all to take this into consideration, but normalization of payment could make a huge difference. There's going to be some practices that currently have predominant Medicare and Medicaid mixes that are going to have the funds to do primary care the way it should be done. Who are going to be the folks that will benefit by that normalization of reimbursement? And so, my own view is you're estimating worst case here, when an argument can be made if the universal health plan is capable of organizing and financing a genuinely effective primary care system, we could be just fine. And so just want to put that on the record, that this is more complicated, I think, than is being appreciated. Thanks.
Chris, you came off mute. Did you?
No, I just go ahead. Yep.
All right. Then you've already seen this slide. Getting into those adjustments are full total expenditure estimates. So I'm going to keep going because I think members of this committee wanted to discuss this slide in more detail. And Charlie, already have
Well,
your hand up?
actually, I had a question on the previous slide,
okay.
I think. So we can go, I think it's a fairly quick one.
If I could just interject really quick, Ken and Fritz, we have 3 people signed up for public comment, so
Oh,
I'll have to wrap this up in 5 minutes to give them a
I'll,
chance to talk.
I'll maybe hold my question, I guess, yeah.
We'll need to follow up, and I'm hoping you all can
Yeah.
join us again next time, but we can ask anyway.
Yes, seeing Charlie, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think I essentially said my point before on the other slide that had essentially the same kind of information on it, that all these little increments of expenditures beyond the 21.9 billion, in my mind, are essentially implying that there's going to be more providers. And so you did mention something about that they will have time freed up, and so they will be able to provide care. Or that we have made that point. And yes, that is true. We don't pay them more money for that. We basically say we're going to keep you whole. So because you have less administrative burden, we aren't going to pay you quite as much as if you had that much administrative burden. And so I guess one of the things is, have you taken into account or how would you estimate if we decided to pay like 5% less to providers because they're going to save 8 or 10% in administrative costs? What effect that would have on this? Like, I mean, could you have like an elasticity number for each 1% less that we pay? How much would that save? So I guess maybe it's an elasticity question.
Well, we do have a slide that talks that shows what you said. If you reduce provider reimbursement by 1%, this is how much billions it is. It's on the second to last slide here. Yeah, so right there. So you can see 1%. Since your provider reimbursement is not 100% of your costs, you have pharmacy in there that wouldn't be included, and then you have your admin. So we're just talking about professionals and hospitals here. But you can see the notes over there says we just take an increment of 1%. So 1% less with our in the full scenario. So full benefits covering Medicare is worth 700 million in total cost. So not quite $1 billion. So you can kind of read those. Everything is multiplicative. We did it in 1%. So whatever 1% is worth, if you want 10%, just multiply that number by 10. Now that's not perfect, right? Because not everything is linear, but this should give you an idea of what what some of these potential policies / cost containment levers are worth.
Yeah, that helps a lot.
All right, again, we have two minutes left. So are there any other questions? I can go back to this slide if that's helpful. Jeff?
This material was not included on the website when we started. Will it be included after today's meeting?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Fritz, anything else to add?
No.
Oh, John?
Yeah, just one general question, and I don't know if you're really able to get data on this, but knowing how Kaiser approaches these issues, I think would be helpful. And what savings has Kaiser been able to mobilize? Because it's the most integrated plan. Its medical management is all done by the group itself. There's no duplication in terms of that. Just putting that out there as I think an interesting source of information for all of us going forward to the degree we can sort that out.
And I did actually have one more question relating to monopsony purchasing power, especially for pharmaceuticals. Did you have a slide that gets at that potential savings, or is that not included in this analysis?
We do have a slide in our previous deck that goes over some basic pharmacy concepts. I'm trying to think. I don't think, Ken, that we put any type of an estimate on savings on that.
I think that the pharmacy discussion there's a lot of different levers to pull. So for now, we're just showing this as what happens if there's a 1% reduction in pharmacy costs as a result of management practices rebates. But I think that's where we would get Kristen involved, and where the specific gives going to be a specific amount, and it's more that we need details on what's going to be done before we can really put anything in the projection. Is how I put it.
Yeah, we would have to have a program design to really to be able to model. We have no program structure to really make any assumptions on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually.
Okay, I think we're gonna have to stop there. Not to put you on the spot, Fritz and Ken, but it seems that we have some follow-up items, and one thing I noted is that there were potentially questions on the numbers for Medicare, Medicaid dual eligibles that need to be worked out, as well as some other questions that our members had for you. And I wonder if you'd be willing to join us at the next meeting as follow-up. I don't know that we got through all the questions either, and don't need to tell us now, but that's something that I would like to put back on the agenda, because I feel like we ran out of time.
Yeah, that's no problem. We can join.
Okay, and then in between these two meetings, I wrote a few things down. I may not have captured everything. My understanding is that Richard and John volunteered to review options on reserve targets and funding sources with Echo Northwest. So I'm assuming that our next agenda will also include a more detailed discussion on what you've investigated as far as existing reserves and surpluses and those other questions, those other options, that we can just have a good discussion as a committee. I don't anticipate we'll be making recommendations. We can't make recommendations for the board anyway in time for the next board meeting. So we might as well wait until the first March meeting to make our formal recommendations on that area. It sounds like there will be a recalibration of the revenue target, reconciliation between the cost estimate and revenue so that we can identify the size of the gap of the revenue. Am I missing anything? Does anyone have anything else that we need to talk through? I mean, we have 2 hours next time, so maybe that's enough. Okay, so with that, I'd like to turn it over to public comment. We did receive written public comments in our emails yesterday, I believe it was. And I know there was one, it was a concern about that we're maybe missing a fundamental cost saving mechanism for the universal healthcare system with these cost targets. And the other one, I believe he's also going to provide verbal public comments. So I'll leave it to him to talk for himself. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Isabel to manage the public comments.
Great, thank you so much. Yes, as always, really appreciate the public comment, the people submitting public comments. This can be submitted at any time via our website. Written public comments need to be sent in 72 hours in advance of the meeting, and for oral public comment, you can sign up 24 hours in advance of the meeting. There are 3 people signed up today, and each person will have about 2 minutes to speak. I've got the timer up on the screen. Lou Sininger, you are the first person, and you may begin whenever you're ready.
Hello. I hope you all can hear me. Can you hear me?
Yep, all
Thumbs
good.
up?
Yep.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Thank you. I did put in a written piece about taxing people more depending on their number of dependents. And I would like people to take a look at that. I won't spend any time talking about it other than to say, to me, it's following the insurance model and is the antithesis of universal care. I did want to mention on Helen Belanca's reset, I'm somewhat disappointed that the powers that be have not and did not go to the legislature for more money and more time so that the proposal can be more concise. And I don't think it's ever too late. I mean, if the legislators can have an emergency act to support Planned Parenthood due to the lack of federal funding, I don't see why they can't get together and do emergency funding for this board. The other thing I wanted to talk about was Milliman's proposal. I have a lot of empathy because how do you vision our universal care to be? But if we continue to project what we have, this broken system that we have, its administrative costs, its waste, it's passing patients from one doctor to another, it's wasted time. And if you include all that waste in admin and profit and project it into the future, we're going to be over budgeted. We'll never be able to have universal health care. Thank you for listening and thank you for what you've been doing. I know it's a tough job. Thank you.
Thank you, Lou. And next we have Alex Polikoff.
Thanks. Can everybody hear me okay? Excellent. Thanks again, everybody, for all your work. You know, it's amazing what you've done. I've got a few comments, though. It was interesting. I harking back to what Chair Blanca said earlier in the presentation about, you know, this is not going to be a complete finished plan. That's just that the legislators are just going to say, hey, okay, let's just implement this, or, you know, pass it on as a ballot initiative, right, as it is. So it's feasibility. I think that was a very key comment she made, that really what you're looking at is at least demonstrating the feasibility of this plan. So along those lines, optics are going to count. I made some comments at the last governance board meeting, just as far as the progressivity thing, and I understand that, you know, that your plan is, this effective tax rate, the HCPIT is progressive, but you got to look at what's at the attack ads that are going to be coming up, which is going to be, just for example, they're going to have, Joe the plumber say, why am I paying the same tax rate as Phil Knight? So I really want you to look at those things as far as, address, because the public is going to say, how is this going to impact me? How is this going to impact my family? How is this going to impact my business? And along those lines, there's been talk, even harking back to the task force, but in this committee, as far as a personal tax calculator, something the public, and Charlie's done great work on the spreadsheets, but something that can be accessible on a website that the public can put in and see how this is going to impact them. I don't know, there's been, there's hundreds of thousands of dollars paid to the consultants. And I was under the impression from way back that the consultants were going to produce something like this. And it sounds like that's not going to happen. So that's a concern of mine. And just real quickly on startup costs, I know you're not going to be voting on this or anything, and it's going to be continuing the discussion. But again, look at feasibility. And I'm the easiest thing I think would be to just start up the tax regimen early, institute that to get your reserves. But I think you may run into people saying, well, why am I paying taxes for 4 months and I don't even have any medical services? So like one of the slides said, borrow or pay as you go. I think you could do some combination of that. I mean, again, it would be more complex and then just, going ahead and instituting the tax early. But I'm just trying to emphasize that, you got to look at how the public is going to approach this if you're going to make it work. Anyway, sorry, I went over. Thanks again for your work.
Thank you. And next is Tom Sinsick.
Hello, everyone. Tom Sinsick, family nurse practitioner, retired, president of Nurses and Friends for Single Payer. Again, I want to thank you and the staff, all these committee members. It was great to hear that this committee members are willing to continue to push forward. So I'm going to put this out there. It's clear the legislatures would be more than willing to extend the time when this report is due. So the report time is currently artificial, and it's clearly that more time is needed to get the revenue right and the financing right. I don't think you found all the revenue. I mentioned before about the issue of the millions of dollars that are in student fees. They're related to health insurance. I hope those have been calculated in there, but there's millions in the state that go into student college fees on that. The other, I want to comment on the issue of the provider time. I am a primary care provider, 1/3 more time, get paid no more. The system saves dollars in the administrative burden that comes after I provide care. That's where the savings is. I can get paid the same amount. Don't need to get paid more or less, just say 1/3 more patients. That's where, again, the question is, do we need more patient time? I got a little confused on the dental. A lot of dental care is being paid for. I'm not sure why it is or isn't. I'll need an explanation later about how that's in the system or not. But I guess the biggest emphasis is the issue that the work is going to have to continue. And we got the brain trust in these committees, this committee and these committees. The board has to make the decisions. And I'm not sure the process for continuing or discontinuing these permitted by the law has been followed. So I'm going to call that into question now. Has the board decided when the committees will continue or discontinue? There are others. We know that some people may have, used up their time because this has been a long, hard process. But there are others in the wings that will do the work going forward if some people need to step aside because just the time is up for them. So keep that in mind. The work is going to continue. The advocacy is going to continue, and we're going to get this done. It's constitutionally necessary. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That's everybody.
Okay, thanks to everybody who provided verbal comments today. I just want to note that I am bringing the recommendation forward to the board at our next meeting that this committee voted to continue through September. So that's happening. And then someone would need to make a motion for the board to vote on it. Charlie, do you have one last thing?
Yeah. So I have actually a little bit of follow-up to Lou's written suggestion. So one of the questions he asked is, is related to the family size rate readjustment. And so one of the questions is, how much would getting rid of that affect the tax rate? So essentially, the current proposed tax rate is 10.1%. If you got rid of that family size rate readjustment, it would go to 11%. About 11.04%. So a little bit more. One of the comments that he made is that larger families tend to have lower income. And in fact, the data shows that those with higher income tend to have more exemptions on the returns. So it's actually the other way around as far as exemptions are concerned. Another thing to keep in mind is that it doesn't affect any low income people. Lower income people below about 400% of federal poverty level, the more people you have, the less you pay. I mean, that's what the tax is right now. So it doesn't kick in until about 400% of federal poverty level. Then a larger family would pay about the same amount as the small family, the same rate. And for example, family size of 4, and these are 2026 or 2022 numbers, so they've gone up 17% since then. But for a family size of 4, at about 126,000, they would pay the same, and it isn't until about 150,000 that they're paying much more, and much more isn't much because it's about $1,000 more or something. I shouldn't say that. It's about $400 more, as the most that a family of 4 would pay more than a family of 1. And that doesn't come into play until about 150,000. So it's pretty high income levels where it starts, but there is something that we could adjust it down a little bit, and it would and that would be to say, yeah, for low incomes, the family size or we continue to say you always pay less if you have a bigger family, but at some point it increases a little bit so that large families pay as the same as a small family. If you did that, then you would only need to increase the tax rate to 10.36% rather than 10.1%. So it would be a much smaller increase. So we could be thinking about possible changes to that and what we want to do with that. So I just want to put that out there as a possible thing for thinking about going forward. So
Thanks
stop
for
there.
the clarification, Charlie, and potential fix, and we can address that next time. Do you have a real quick comment, Jeff? Because we're at time.
Yes, thank you, Cheryl, for taking the continuation of the committee to the governance board, even though it's been made very clear to us that you have no chance of succeeding. I appreciate your taking it forward.
Sure. Okay, with that, just want to check with Dr. McDonald. Do you have any other final comments or announcements or anything before we close?
I do not. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you, everybody, for your participation, and we'll see you next time. We're adjourned.